listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition and another week of the most disruptive show. Covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody had a great weekend. It is Monday, July 26th, the last week in July. Next month is August, in case you lost your calendar. Without further ado, let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were about 14,637 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. There were also about 49 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 51,939 cases per day, an increase of 170% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point. It has been hanging there for a while now. And 56% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,405,954 people total across the United States and killed 610,463 people, a number we just simply cannot make sense of mentally, Anyway, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey said it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks, end quote, for the rising COVID cases in the state. She also said that the state is seeing nearly 100% of hospitalizations from the unvaccinated. And she gave broadly, she's doing this because they're facing an extremely high case count. One of the states leading the pack right now in the grim sort of way that they, along with Florida and a few others, are. And she's trying to combat this very simply. We'll come back on it. There's one thing I wanted to say about this, but GOP Representative Clay Higgins of Louisiana said yesterday that he and his wife have contracted COVID-19 for a second time, referring to the virus as a, quote, Chinese Communist Party biological attack weaponized virus, end quote. That's a lot. There's a lot of words for biological attack weaponized virus. I don't know. I'm being critical of the one part that it shouldn't be.
Would have been sufficient.
It would have been sufficient. That's the thing. I'm not criticizing the main thing, which is he's accusing China. But anyway, no, he just used too many words for it. And probably a little bit premature to be accusing China of genocide. Another genocide, to be clear. In national political news, the Department of Justice has decided to drop a probe into Andrew Cuomo, investigating whether or not his administration violated the rights of nursing home residents. That's right. You heard that. The Justice Department, Biden's Justice Department, has dropped its probe into Cuomo. Now, the FBI still has an ongoing probe into Cuomo, does it not, Jamarl? And New York State still has an ongoing probe into specifically sexual harassment allegation stuff that's coming back. But
correct.
They're investigating the nursing home thing too. Letitia James is investigating that too locally.
Yeah, he had multiple people investigating it.
And the FBI.
Yeah. So this is not him off the hook by any stretch of the imagination. This could just be, all right, well, they're looking into it. Maybe we don't need to do it. It could be that.
And it's Biden's, it is what
And
Biden
that.
can control
And that.
to get the eye of the derelict media off of Cuomo, who was like a DNC star last year. And
That's an understatement.
Well, he may have fallen from graces a little bit. He's still DNC. He's still his homie, bro. He's still Biden's friend or whatever. He's, on the same line of that party. Therefore, you got to save him.
Well, that's the catch, and that's the question. Whether or not this is going to be one of those things where a side is saved because of their political affiliation. I don't know. Like you say, there's still multiple investigations. Cuomo have like 6 investigations on his head. So some of this stuff is serious. But we'll see. I mean, if he gets away, if he skates on all of it, then let's come back to this conversation.
I think we should. Well, we should come back to this conversation
anyway.
regardless.
Right.
Because this is pretty scandalous in my opinion. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. In the last week, the United States has had, this number's a little bit confusing, 915 shootings and 430 people dead. Wait, producer, can I please get you to fact check the writing on that headline?
915 shootings.
915 shootings.
Yeah, with 315 people dead out of the shoot, meaning a third dead.
430 people dead.
430.
430
50%.
people dead, yes. Yeah, and
we're
a
going to have
massive
somebody
crime
coming
spike.
off for Chicago tomorrow. Hopefully. from Chicago tomorrow. Because this has been a pet thing of mine. I've been really fascinated. Well, let's finish that. Let's go back to that.
Really fascinated by crime.
Right. Right.
Okay,
right.
Batman. All right. We'll come back to that. In international news, there are ongoing clashes outside of parliament in Tunisia following the president's decision to suspend the legislature today, which has been decried as a coup by the main parties in the country. The Speaker of Parliament began a sit-in at the building. This is Parliament. Troops have sealed that building, and outside of it, rival political constituencies backing the president and the Speaker for Parliament threw stones at each other. Again, a coup, what's being called a coup in Tunisia. New records from the United Nations show that Afghanistan's civilians have been killed in record numbers in the first half of this year, with militants for the Taliban having captured approximately 50% of the country's territory, although the Taliban itself says that they have taken upwards of 85% of the territory. That's a pretty big difference there. Yeah, but we'll come back to it too. We've got a bunch of stuff to talk about here. President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines gave his last State of a Nation address to the country in the last few hours, actually. This is a country he led for over 5 years, starting with a brutal anti-drug crackdown as the nation continues to deal with the coronavirus crisis at this point, and the economy of the Philippines faces a long, ultimate road to recovery. In Earth and Science news, the FAA has classified Jeff Bezos as not an astronaut. While their definition includes reaching 50 miles above sea level, which he has, passengers must also, quote, demonstrate activities during flight that were essential to public safety or contributed to human space flight safety, end quote. Due to the fully automated nature of the Blue Origin flight, no one on New Shepard will receive their wings. But at some point, here's the thing, at some point, we're going to get fully automated spacecrafts, right? So does that mean that space is going to be filled with people traveling through space who we don't get to call astronauts?
That's interesting. I was listening to their definition. If they added an element, I thought they were going to add an element of human progress or something like that into it, or something like you're doing something for the betterment of the world or something like that. Their thing is just, you're just doing stuff in space.
It's true. And just because I book a ride in a cruise ship doesn't mean that I'm a sailor.
Exactly.
Or just because I fly in a commercial plane doesn't mean that I'm a pilot. On the other hand, don't you want to be an astronaut? Don't you want to like say, I went
if that's
to
the case,
space.
he should have learned how to fly that craft and got in that craft and flew that craft himself.
I'm happy if we turn the term astronaut into the kind of thing we like do to like pat people on the head and tell you did a good job. You went to space, buddy. And then we can come up with some slightly more developed modern term for like space pilot.
I don't know. I like it's kind of like professor. When I call people professor, I do so as a thing of acknowledgement of, experience and all of this other stuff. I feel the same way about astronaut on some level. I don't want to, subvert that. I mean, and in fact, not subvert it. It may get that much more prestigious considering if all this stuff gets automated. If you got the Bezoses of the world just flying into space in automated craft, then those astronauts become esteemed people.
Definition of astronaut can go live on Pluto for all I care, which is no longer a planet, of course. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Just trying to bring two space-related change to definitions together.
Scientists, the scientists, so Shane knows this. I had been in contact with a scientist. I think the guy was from Yale or something like that.
He was from Yale.
And I was trying to get him on the show because I wanted him to have a conversation about UFOs. He said he was skeptical of it. I said, great. He says, you don't get how skeptical. I said, even better. I said, because look, the point of this is not so much to get agreement from you. The point of this is to have just a conversation in regards to where scientists on this particular front. I guess my point is, if these guys can pretend like reality is not reality, then I could say Pluto's a planet. Pluto's a planet, sir. That's where I'm at. I'm in my own, hysteria with the stuff.
I think a lot of people have been in the Pluto as a planet hysteria for like years and years now.
It has been a fight. People have been very angry. I believe it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was like, I don't care about your feelings and that type of stuff.
Yeah. I'm not going to step into the middle of that.
No.
No, that would be unwise. That would surely be unwise.
Now, I want to go back to the other one we were talking about, refresh my memory. We hit it, and then I was like, all right, let's come back to that one.
There were a couple. One, I think the most recent would be the Afghanistan one, but I might be wrong.
Right.
But there were a couple others. Right.
So the Afghanistan one, the Taliban, there's an interregnum in certain areas of the country where the government forces and the Taliban forces are in disagreement of who's in charge. It's that. That's why you're getting that weird number, that 50-30 or that 50-80,
totally.
Where the government was like, oh, it's just 50%. Well, that's because the government is maybe being a little bit aggressive in the areas to which they say they inhabit and they govern. Also, I was reading or was watching other stuff on this over the weekend. I'm fascinated by this. The Taliban thing, the government itself really only controls a small percentage, meaning there's only a small percentage of the country that's in modernity. The rest of the country, the majority of it is just wasteland. It's like nothing there.
A lot of most of the money that we put into Afghanistan
Went to the cities.
goes to the cities and propping up the government in the cities, and that's their basin of control. That's where they
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at the Taliban and they're in the outer areas, the other areas of the stuff, and people are using them for courts and all this other stuff. And so it becomes this thing of, well, yeah, you can kind of see where the public itself didn't latch on to this notion of modernity. Because if anything, I think that's what the U.S. was trying to deliver, right? Like, hey, we're going to put stores, we're going to give you Burger King and McDonald's, you're going to have houses, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that didn't go to the outskirts, meaning you might have won the battle of the hearts if this money didn't go into just basic corruption. That's the catch, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the Rick and Morty episode where Rick is trying to steal this money from him and everything else, and he gives them modernity in order to basically crash their world. It's like, all right, if you guys get modernity, maybe you'd be less wed to, I don't know, the tribes. Maybe you'd be less wed to whatever else. I think it's that.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is you spent, what, 1.2 or $2 trillion, and the money just mostly went into the capitals. I mean, it's, problematic.
It's a failed mission from the get-go. I would argue that America doesn't know why we became a successful nation, let alone how to make another nation successful. And I'm not just talking about the economic resources, although clearly those are a part of our success in America. The isolation, clearly, those are accidents for us.
Yeah.
But like how we became a nation, culturally, politically, institution building-wise, how you developed all these
Even
things.
a superpower.
We don't, well...
Or you mean a nation in general?
Even a nation, because here's the thing. What is America unique of in the history of world nations up to the point of its creation, as far as we can tell? It was a colonial nation that rebelled, created its entire whole new thing, succeeded at that, and did that on this new sort of ideology that also resonated with a lot of older ideologies. And I'm not trying to say you can like that or hate it or whatever. You can look at all the good and the bad things you've done.
Just make your argument. I don't know if I entirely agree, but go for it.
My argument would be we created it somewhat out of whole cloth. Sure, inheriting older institutions, but my point is we had to put this stuff together and patch together in our own weird way. And we did, and it was inherited from, not just Greek democracy and Roman republicanism and Roman imperialism, but hopefully more republicanism than imperialism. But my point is all these old mishmashes of sources that we put together, we did that stuff. We still don't fully understand how we did that. Yet in our hubris, think that we can export that to other nations. And whereas the Roman Empire didn't, its job was simpler. It needed to turn its proxy states or its vassals into vassals or proxy states. We, because we see our things, because we see the world contest ideologically, need to convert our vassals or our proxy states into democracies, which is a far higher burden.
Yes.
It's a much higher hurdle to crash. There are a bunch of different types of political systems, and democracy is one. And if you think about cultures and political systems having matches, it might take, this is where neocons could go right. It might take a very long time, or it might take no time at all for a given culture to accommodate democracy, depending on what that culture looks like and what its political institutions look like. My point was, it was a failed mission from the start. And with the Taliban specifically, there's this idea of Muqaddimiyya, which has to do with this philosopher, Ibn Khaldun, big Islamic political philosopher back in the day, who had this idea. He was arguably the first sociologist. And he had this theory of churn in polities, in political bodies, where basically you'd have you'd have old winners who'd previously won wars, who basically got lazy. They created bureaucracies. Instead of being sort of warlike and warrior-like and having real tight bonds with each other, they created these organizations that they were able to govern a society with.
Right.
But that means they get weaker. They can't operate as a sort of unified military body. So they get weaker. They get stagnant. Then you have these outside players that come in, who are able to operate sort of clan-like. They have either strong familial connections or strong kinship ties, strong friendships. They have these deep connections with each other. Even religious connections can sort of. I'm talking about the Taliban.
Yeah,
comes in from the outside. You can also see this with Manchu and the Ming Empire in China, turning the Ming Empire into Qing. You can see this in different societies historically. China itself is a history of these barbarian tribes, usually riding horses to the north, coming in from the north to the south, taking over perpetually. This is why you'd have these Mongol or these northern Siberian tribes. It's a thing throughout history. And so the idea that we couldn't create a functional government and that there are these insider outsiders who are local to the area, far more local than us, who have
more connected,
more political affiliation, more political vitality, who can come in and easily take over this thing that we didn't know how to build in the first place. It's not a shock.
Well, the thing is, I mean, we are invaders coming into a country different customs, different ideas, and all of that stuff. Not to mention we're killing a lot of people, meaning the number of people that you're killing in the process of that war, especially from the standpoint of civilians, is tainting the public against you. I mean, that was one of the other things that people were talking about. Oh, the Americans kicked in my house, et cetera, et cetera. I wasn't a part of any of this stuff, meaning I'm just tending to my goats and all of a sudden these guys are coming and shooting people. And that taints the public against you, whether the American public realizes this or not. A bomb or being incinerated by a bomb is just as bad as being beheaded. Just as bad.
Yeah.
You're still dead. In fact, the bomb is going to kill a lot more people as opposed to that beheading. And this is not pro-beheadings. This is kind of making a point that we are invested, or we went into a country that we didn't necessarily understand for reasons that wasn't necessarily in that country's best interest, purely for our own benefit. And we're shocked that a group that had, is part of the community, part of the society, despite the fact that we consider this a barbaric or religious law and everything else.
We do.
But it doesn't really matter. It's within their own context.
No, but that's what makes it really unique. That's what makes this situation really unique, I think. What's the last country that slid back this is how we would phrase it maybe, slid back from modernity into barbarianism or whatever, that's so far away from our definition of civilization, from our definition of civilized? Like Iran isn't as far as the Taliban.
Just it. We don't need them to be that.
I'm saying literally, who?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah,
the Taliban stands out.
They are very tribal.
Decades level.
Yes, they're very tribal.
It's been a long time since we've seen this kind of thing.
Yes, it's very tribal. And if you look, I keep saying Vietnam. I mean, and if we look at it, Afghanistan has been a death of empires over and over and over again. I mean, what? France, Russia, death of empire from the standpoint of the United States is too tough, but we're definitely leaving with our tail between our legs. Look, it's very strange. The areas of Afghanistan that are the capitals and everything else, those look relatively modern, give or take, like for a Middle Eastern country. But then it's like the overwhelming majority of the country is just not. Like it's just sand, dust, these corner stores and all of that stuff. And from the standpoint of control, yeah, Taliban has control of those areas.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about courts, if you're talking about this kind of functional government stuff, as opposed to somebody who they consider to be corrupt, whatever you want to think of the Taliban, they're true believers. And on some level, the true believer thing wins out over corruption, especially if it's corruption from a foreign force that is being managed from above and everything else, as opposed to this kind of force from below that, look, despite the money, despite the training, despite all of that other stuff, the Taliban is going to take that country.
Well, corruption with these kinds of things gets a little bit hard to talk about because on the one hand, I get where you're coming from completely, but a lot of things that they might do might look like corruption, but they might look like corruption to outsiders. So for instance, if you're rewarding your friends and your family primarily because those are the people you've worked with, those are the people you trust, those are the people you know, that's what you do if you don't have a successful administration, if you don't have a trust in your political system, that anybody that the university puts into your administration isn't going to be working for their grandparent or their business interest, but for the spirit of the nation that you're supposed to govern, that kind of thing.
Yes.
That's where that can look a lot like corruption, and maybe it is corruption in some level, but it's arguably not like
trillions of dollars, Shane, for basically mud huts.
Maybe.
I mean, no, literally, when you get trillions of dollars, read the Afghan papers. The Afghan papers makes it very clear. Like the amount of money that we were dropping into Afghanistan, it's like if you drop the $1 trillion into, let's say, a city. Okay, yeah, you can spend that, right? Because it's a city is modern, you can add all of the stuff. What does it look like for an area that's in the Stone Age? Like, how do you spend money like that? They were sending so much money because in their heads, they were sending people say, look, you need to spend this money. All right, I don't care how you spend it, spend the money. Because they wanted to, get this stuff along. They thought just by putting money in, that would in and of itself be enough. Missing the fact that people, when you have money and you don't necessarily care or have checkpoints about where it's going and all this other stuff, it's corruption. It's just gets corrupt. I feel you, whatever it looks like. I'm just saying the public had a very good sense in their mind that this looks utterly corrupt and these guys are just full of it. That was the public thought. And so if the public thinks that, how do you get a functional society where there is some kind of allegiance to the government because you have a shared interest in the process when you think that these guys are just corrupt? That was the perception of the public.
Yeah, I hear you. And you were looking forward at the Taliban, and that was what I was addressing too, not the past.
Oh, fair enough. I would say this, though. Going forward, it would be interesting to see how the Taliban changes in order to accommodate this kind of new world.
Yeah.
Because regardless of what they want in regards to, we're tribal and everything else, they will be using internet. They will be using television on some level. They may stop people from dancing at weddings. By the same token, they're not going to have a choice, but having some level of technological advancement within the context of their country. They're not going to have a choice.
I don't know.
At least I don't think they are.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see how savvy they are.
Yeah.
I mean, because this is a civilizational mismatch in a way that I really don't think we're used to. If you look at what China's done, they've decided to adopt the international institutions that,
These guys are still using tribes.
West broadly generated.
Yeah.
These are, this is in a completely other category. And I'm not saying anything more than that. Because, like you just questioned, they could make a pretty big shift within the course of just a couple of years or a decade or two. And in the same way, in the same way that America opened up Japan and you had the Meiji Restoration, you might see something similar. I'm not saying that that's what would it require, or that would be good or anything like that. But they may open in a deeper way relations with a couple of other countries. You know what I mean? Yeah. To like modernize and do that kind of thing.
I don't think that. I still say I don't think they're going to have a choice. I don't know if the tribal thing works in our current day and age, especially when they've come in contact with the American military. They've come in contact at this point, which is making overtures with the Russians and so forth. They've been able to make a peace treaty with the U.S. to get out of the country. No, they've been able to successfully pull off certain things that are indicative of people who are running countries. The wild part is there's an Afghanistan government, but that's not, it's almost understood on some level that that government is going to have a hard way to go to maintain its power. And look, at the point where they've taken like 60% of the country, let's take a low figure, 60% of the country, that means the government is ruling less than half of a country that it's supposed to rule. They're going to have a hard way to go unless they can get soldiers back online, troops back online, people to, let's say, pull allegiance. But at this point in those areas, those people are terrified of the Taliban. I mean, I was just looking at, people are not wrong for saying that there's a certain level of modernity in Afghanistan that is not necessarily in the areas that are controlled by the Taliban. And people are not wrong for saying, okay, I like to dance at weddings, and these guys are going to kill me for that. Or they're going to, beat me in the middle of, whatever for walking for indecency. Okay, what do you mean by indecency? Oh, I forgot to have my hair thing around my neck. Yeah, that stuff is going to happen. The catch becomes, though, do you really want to invest your sons and daughters in perpetuity, in indefinite amount of time, in order to get a country to be something that you want, not necessarily something that your country just is and has to work its way out of? All countries have their dilemmas, and Afghanistan is no different. I didn't want to go there in the first place, and it's like this argument of, well, we should stay forever seems weird under this, this just seems weird as an argument. It's like you've invaded a country. At some point, there's a drawdown. The idea that you just stay there forever is insane to me. But that's the argument that many of these people make who basically want to stay in Afghanistan. I get there's downsides for staying in Afghanistan. Hate to tell you this, there were downsides for going. And the number of people that we have killed have not helped us win the country. It may be as basic as that. How many people have they killed? And if all of these people could say, I have had a family member that was killed by the U.S., or I had a family member that was killed in war, or whatever, then you have a hard time winning the hearts and minds of that group. So I feel you. I don't think there's anything wrong with I think your comment was just is what it is, if that makes sense. There's nothing to put around it. All right. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. Be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I want to talk about individual liberty. Individual liberty. And in many respects, I think I've said on more than one occasion that from the standpoint of a lefty, I tend to trend more on the libertarian side and leaving me to my devices. But those are things that are basically individual to me. When it gets to things that are larger to the larger group, that gets a little different. There's an aspect of people who call themselves socialist libertarians, and this may become the closest to it, and it sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not necessarily so, since libertarian was more a lefty definition. It became a right-wing one when it got to the United States. Today, 51,000, let's see, about 14,637 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 49 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 51,939 cases per day, an increase of 170% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of total American public is fully vaccinated, and 56% of residents have received at least one dose. What does individual liberty mean in a context like this? Meaning, if I take a particular act, and that act is singular to me, okay, fair enough. What if I take a particular act, and that act injures 5 other people? What about their individual liberty to not be harmed by an act that I've taken? And is there a difference in taking an act even if you don't take an act that causes that effect? And I know that sounds a little weird. If 49% of the public getting vaccinated is not enough, basically, for the United States to get herd immunity and so forth, well, what does it mean? You have a large number of people at this point, I think it's over 40%, that have basically said, I am not going to get vaccinated. And the people who've been very clear about the fact that they were not going to get vaccinated, the majority didn't get vaccinated. Meaning, going forward, you may get 5% more that says, yes, I am definitely going to get a vaccination. What about the rest? Do we have a responsibility to our fellow Americans? Yay or nay? Now, I would say yes to that, despite this notion of individual liberty and being pretty hard on this point of allowing me to do whatever I'm doing. Let's hear Brian Kilmeade for a moment, because I think we spoke about this before, but I want you to hear Brian Kilmeade, because this is individual liberty. I shouldn't be pushed by a government to do X or Y, even if that X or Y is to save my fellow Americans. Let's play the clip.
Stories been with us for the last 2 years is COVID-19. The origin is the top story, but the focus of this administration on vaccination is mind-boggling. Listen, in many cases, they've done a very good job getting the word out and getting the vaccine out. From Johnson & Johnson to Pfizer to Moderna, they're available if you want them, but that's not enough. Now you need to be berated by none other than Dr. Fauci because you're playing politics. That's the reason you may have not gotten it.
But they're not playing politics. You have a vaccine that has been dramatically proficient against this virus. I mean, for God's sake, when you're looking at the numbers, you're talking about basically 99% of the people who are getting sick are people who are not vaccinated. It is very clear at this point. And from the standpoint of the federal government pushing people to wear masks, does the federal government have a responsibility? And basically, take it from that. Do we individually have a responsibility to one another, especially if the whole point is to cut down loss of life? It's not theoretical. Over 600,000 people have dropped dead that are no longer on this planet due to COVID and the responsibility of the way the government behaved in dealing with the COVID issue. And now you have Fox Newses of the world that have taken a political stance, or a stance that is, let's say, emboldened by their public or backed up by their public, to be basically a safe space for anti-vaxxers. And in many respects, this turns into, we don't or shouldn't have to wear masks, we don't like these mandates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the death count keeps going up. What is individual liberty in a context where you're getting other people killed? This is not me deciding to smoke in a room by myself and in 20 years drop dead from cancer. That's not what this is. This is, I am going to walk in public spaces, not do the basics of wearing a mask, not get a vaccine, despite the fact I wouldn't care so much if the virus just stuck with individuals and didn't move on to anybody else. But that's not the world we live in. If you walk out without a mask, if you decide not to get vaccinated, and if you believe either COVID is not a big deal or you don't necessarily care, the truth of the matter is you not only could be a carrier, you could end up being a petri dish for one of the variants that basically breaks through the immunity that I've developed with the vaccine. Meaning each and every person out there that is not vaccinated, 99% basically are a petri dish. And in the context of being a petri dish, well, all sorts of stuff can come out of that. And the stuff that can come out of that can have a negative impact on the other people that are basically vaccinated. Meaning the unvaccinated are indeed the problem. Let's play a thing for the mayor, for the governor of Alabama, I believe, who is making this point pretty clear, Republican governor. Let's hear it.
What is it going to take to get people to get shots in arms?
I don't know. You tell me. Folks supposed to have common sense. And but it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks. It's the unvaccinated folks that are letting us down.
But as a leader of the state, don't you think it's your responsibility to try and help get this situation under control?
I've done all I know how to do.
I've done all I know how to do. I've done all I know how to do. It's the unvaccinated folks. Now, she doesn't want to say this. She doesn't love making this particular political opinion. In her head, people should have good sense to take the correct approach for them and for their countrymen, or for that matter, for their family. Well, nonsense. You have a huge number of people who are decidedly, let's say, between things in one particular party, and has found a safe space in regard to the Republican Party on this issue. More Republicans have gotten involved in saying, get vaccinated, you're dying, what is wrong with you? And the governor is right. The state that she's in is a high state, meaning a high number of people that are infected state. And if you go through the numbers, it's very clear. 96.2% of the COVID deaths in Alabama, in her state, were people who were unvaccinated. And you can go down the numbers. 98 to 99+% of the people that are being hospitalized are dying with COVID have not been vaccinated. In Maryland, 100% of the COVID deaths not vaccinated. 95% of the new COVID cases not vaccinated. In Louisiana, 97% of the COVID deaths and cases not vaccinated. In Los Angeles County, over 99% of the COVID cases and hospitalizations and deaths were not vaccinated. In New York, 98.4% of COVID-19 hospitalizations and 98.8% of COVID-19 deaths unvaccinated. It is decidedly clear at this point, decidedly clear, that it is the unvaccinated that are actually getting infected and it's spreading the virus. Now, this is, yes, you should get a tongue wagging, at the very least, from people who are unvaccinated, who are looking at you and saying, our individual liberty to be healthy is being breached by your lack of due diligence to your own health and safety. Am I my brother's keeper? I am, whether I want to or not. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We're also joined by our producers. We have Cordell Woodland. I just want to make sure. I wanted to say Woodland, but I wasn't certain. Austin Pelly, excellent. And of course, Shane Stranahan. He's my host, my co-host. Excellent. We're going to talk about the Olympics. And it is great. It is interesting. It is easy and engaging for people to kind of get involved in what is taking place. The American basketball team, we are in the Olympics, and we've started using our NBA players for our Olympic Games. And so I was shocked to stumble across a headline that read, U.S. men's basketball loses to France of all places, 83-76. And this is apparently the first loss since 2004 when we lost to Argentina. I'll go to you first, Cordell. What happened? How are our prime sport? This is our dominant sport. Like, this is a sport we're supposed to just dominate for 100 years. How are we no longer churning out godlike athletes to come down and descend to play men? What is taking place?
Evolution.
The men got fired.
Evolution has happened. We came from the 90s where we had the dream team go out and dominate the world, and even into the Redeem team.
Keep in mind, that was Michael Jordan. Yeah. That was
Karl Malone.
Yeah.
Charles Barkley. I mean, all the greats.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, you had the Redeem team go with LeBron and Kobe and all of those guys go and do the same thing. But the reality is now the world has caught up to America's basketball. A lot of the NBA is filled with international players. Luka Doncic is one of the best players in the NBA. He's not on Team USA. He's not from this country. France has the Defensive Player of the Year, Rudy Gobert. They have at least, off the top of my head, 6 NBA players on their roster. So this USA team is we have the idea that they're going to go out there and dominate, but in reality, they don't have the best players from the NBA. LeBron James isn't there. Kevin Durant's there, but Steph Curry isn't there. It's a lot of big name guys who aren't on this team. And a lot of these guys don't have the chemistry that these international guys have that play together pretty much every offseason in FIBA.
Yeah.
USA doesn't, these guys don't play with each other that way. And you also have three guys, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, and Devin Booker, who are coming off the NBA Finals, who just got to Tokyo the day before the game.
Oh,
so, and these guys are playing big minutes. Drew Holiday was the leading scorer on the team, which says a lot. He shouldn't be the lead. He's a very good player, but he shouldn't be the leading scorer on Team USA with guys like Kevin Durant and Damian Lillard there. So Team USA, who lost a couple of exhibition games and, we're kind of hitting the don't panic button just yet, it might be getting there. It might be getting time to start panicking for Team USA.
So what about, it sounds like a lot of the problem here is like NBA versus Olympics. It sounds like a lot of the best players from the NBA simply weren't on the Olympic team. Why is that, Cordell?
I think the stress level, well, I will say especially this year, coming off of the uniqueness of last season with COVID and having to stop the season kind of almost as the season ended and then restarted in about July and go to the NBA bubble the way they did. And then this year, the season started later than usual. It started in January, I believe. It was a condensed year. It was just unique. And a lot of injuries had the big topic in this year's NBA playoffs were all the injuries. So I think the injuries were a big part. Guys didn't want to overstress their bodies. Guys who were lucky enough to make it out of this season healthy didn't want to overstress their bodies. So that's why you don't have like possibly the world's greatest shooter and Steph Curry out on Team USA. LeBron was filming Space Jam and everything. LeBron is kind of past the Olympics at this point. So I think it's a lot of that. And really, I mean, these guys that are there, they're younger. They are pretty good. This is still a very good roster, but this isn't the A squad. I'm not going to go out there and say this is the A squad.
Not the A squad. No. I like that.
It's kind of like if you guys ever watched the All-Star game for the NBA.
Yes.
I know you have. For the idea of it being like supposedly one of the greatest sporting events in the NBA or within basketball, it is terrible to watch. It is so boring.
Really?
Yeah, it is. No one plays defense. It's all 3-point shooting at this point.
Yeah,
because that's where the NBA has gone to. It's because people don't want to get injured is the biggest thing.
Right.
So you put together these dream teams and then they just let people walk by them. Am I going to step in front of a 7-foot dude running at 20 miles an hour and possibly risk the rest of my season or secure my contract and wait till it actually matters when I get back to my games? So it just felt like that with the Olympics now.
That's pretty cynical. That's pretty cynical for you, Austin. I mean, you're basically saying that the people, they're like, I don't want to risk my career, dog, so I'm not going to take that extra step, or I'm not going to put my arm on the particular way.
Yeah. In like the one games where it like doesn't really matter. I mean, they're not getting the revenue from this.
Oh, I see what you mean. The All-Star game is not a game that matters to their contract.
Right.
So it's not all the other games. It's just that very specific game. It's like we're not going to take a chance. Yeah.
And if every one of those players were playing at their best and they were really trying to win that game, it would be
won that
so
game?
like every single one would be historic.
Yeah.
You'd see the best of the best going at it.
So do you think that's what's taking place for the Olympics? That this game doesn't really matter. It's national pride, but it's not my contract.
To a degree, yeah.
And if I get injured at the Olympics, what's going to happen when I get home? That's the other question.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the guys like Kevin Durant, he's a great scorer.
That's
but
what I mean. What happens?
He's got the bones of a bird.
Right.
So if he goes out, then like, and that's
if he gets hit in a particular way, he breaks a bone, basically.
Yeah.
So what happens if any of these guys get injured at the Olympics? I mean, how does that affect their contracts back home? I'm just curious.
Well, to my knowledge, it wouldn't affect their contracts.
Okay.
To my knowledge, I could be wrong, but at the same time, I haven't seen anybody face a real serious injury. Actually, Paul George did tear his Achilles in a FIBA game a couple years ago, and it didn't affect his contract with the Pacers at the time. Okay. So, for what it's worth, I don't think it changes in that aspect. But I don't think that these guys are going out there just basically giving 60% effort because they think this doesn't matter. I think this definitely matters to them.
Yeah.
I saw Damian Lillard dive on the ground for a ball. I haven't seen him do that in an NBA game. So I think this matters to them. I just think that they're caught off guard because, number one, they don't play defense. There's no defense in the NBA. And it's a lot of touchy fouls in the NBA that these guys always get that they're not getting in the international game. And we have this mindset sometimes that we're tougher than these people all across the world.
Do you think
this game is showing it's not?
Do you think it's that? Where they went in with the same mentality that we have, where it's like, oh, we're going to dominate.
Yeah.
And they get there and they're like, wow, these guys are tough. But at the point where they realize, oh my God, these guys are tough, it's too late. And national pride. I mean, think about what they think the nation thinks of them after losing this game. Like, if you are one of those players and you know that the nation has, we're going to dominate. That's what our players are going to do. We're going to dominate. We expect 30-point wins. That's all. Anything less than that is a loss. Like, if that's where you're going, and then you lose, not just 20-point or 3-point win, but lose. Like, what is in their heads about the way that the nation is thinking about them? And what does that do? Like, is that worth more than whatever contract you're talking about? Like, meaning, is it like, all right, this is so radically embarrassing. Like that we've lost this game. Like, is that enough of an incentive? And is it really just we thought we were going to be tougher than what we were, but we thought they were going to be weaker than what they were?
I'm not going to sit here and say I think that they believe that pride is worth more than is more important to them than cashing in on a contract. I don't think that's it.
National embarrassment, man.
I do think that they went in there with the mindset that we're America, this is our sport, and we're supposed to dominate. We are individually gifted. We're better than everybody individually. But Damian Lillard even said it yesterday after the game. Like, there were guys that, because I said France have about 5 or 6 guys on that team that play in the NBA, and Damian Lillard himself said these guys the way they play together in international play, they don't play like that in the NBA. So they're going out there thinking that this guy on France who's in the NBA, he's going to go out there and get the 6 points that he averages in the NBA. But no, this guy has a bigger role here. He's more in tune with his teammates here. He has more trust from his coach here. So he's going to go out there and try to give you 20.
So the good teamwork, the good camaraderie, that makes 100% sense, and I can see that. And if we just have different play styles here, that's going to affect it certainly. But the fact that you don't have like LeBron James, the fact that you don't have like, admittedly, maybe past the Olympics or something, but that you don't have the star players. You were talking about that a couple of minutes ago. That's actually pretty surprising to me. This is the general conversation. It applies to, and basketball would apply to other sports too. Why, I want to like really get into this. Why did they decide not to do the Olympics? Because if it is this big thing, if it's like Jamarl was saying, like this national pride, like we should be the best at this. Why the most basic question? Why were the best players not on that field? Why were they not on that court?
For me, I think if we're talking about a guy like LeBron James who has 2 gold medals already, been there, done that for him. Steph Curry, same way, been there, done that. And I think for these guys, the NBA is what matters first. It's NBA and then Olympics. Or I get what you're saying. Like, this is the world stage. We're facing off against the best players all around the world. So you would think that this would be the competition they're looking for. But in their mind, the best players in the world play in the NBA.
It's all here in the States. And so
this is what matters to them, not going. They win the Olympics, they go get a gold medal, and everybody's like, that's what you're supposed to do. We're not throwing a parade for them here, but they win an NBA title. They're going to shut the whole city down. They're going to parade all through the streets. We're going to give them their flowers right then and there. But there's really no incentive to go win the Olympics.
Just think, like, would you see this headline if the U.S. won? It's expected for them to win at this point. So I think you're giving too much credit for the national pride there. I don't think it matters to a lot of them as much as it does.
But I think it matters if they lose.
But does it stay?
It matters if they lose.
It matters if they lose, but they're already going into the match of like, we're America anyway.
I know, but they just lost.
Yeah.
I mean, meaning if it's expected that they win, like just expected in the way that air is expected through lungs, and then they lose.
Okay, so I believe, I don't watch soccer, sorry. I think the World Cup just happened, right, between Italy and England?
I don't watch soccer.
Right?
I don't mind saying
it was
Conca.
Okay, so Italy won, and I think 3 of the black players on the England team received incredibly racial
I saw that
comments and everything, and they were like being targeted back in England. You will not have that here. If the entire U.S. team goes 0 points every single game, and they come back to the States, guess what? They're still playing. They're still hot shots. They still make their money.
I don't know, man. There'll be national ridicule.
If we're talking, if Kevin Durant,
ridicule now. It's ridicule now. They'll be ridiculed, but to his point, it won't be to the point to where we're stoning them.
It's not going to end a career. They're not going to lose really too many fans. They're going to come back. It's going to be like, wow, you did terrible. A month later, they're going to be playing their game back again, and they're going to be leading the Nets.
All of that is true, but I think you guys are dramatically underestimating pressure from all of these people screaming at them. How are you losing? Because if we're under this mindset that these guys are supposed to win, like, it's not even supposed to be a headline because they're just supposed to win it. And then you see U.S. gets a gold medal in basketball, 20 points, 30 points. You know, if that's true, what is going to be the hysteria that is going to take place here in the sports community if these guys lose like that? I think it would be extreme.
I mean, you're talking about ESPN. It'll be here today, gone tomorrow, to be honest with you. The benefit that they have is that the NBA season is over and the NFL season is about to start. And, I mean, football dominates this country. So, yes, we'll care about it now because the only thing on right now, sports-wise, is Olympics and baseball. But once football season starts, and don't get me wrong, if they don't win gold, people are going to give them crap, deservingly so. They're going to give them crap, but it's not going to be the same amount of crap that they would get had Kevin Durant gone out there and, like, got swept in the NBA playoffs. He would catch way more flack for that, I believe, than losing in the Olympics.
I do agree with that. I just think it's going to be hellish. I just think it would be hellish.
We can close it. More stuff we can talk about, but we're over time, and I know we got more to talk about too when we come back. We're talking the Olympics. Just having a conversation about basketball with producers Cordell Woodland and Austin Pelly. I'm joined by my co-host Jamarl Thomas in the studio. I'm Shane Stranahan. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute, continuing this conversation. We've got another 2+ hours coming to you this morning. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we continue to be joined by producers Cordell Woodland and Austin Pelly in the studio talking about the ongoing Olympics, which jump-started this last Friday with the opening ceremony. I have just a quick question. A couple things to talk about here. We're going to be talking about this fencer on the American team who was accused of a rape and yet was set up with special accommodations because apparently, even though he's an alternate, he's like a really important fencer on the team. He's getting flack over that, the whole American team, as far as I can tell. Not the players, but, the staff kind of. They're coming under scrutiny for this one. But I also wanted to talk about two other things. One, these anti-sex beds. We'll be coming back to these in just a second. But two, just a general sense. How are the things going so far? The Olympic ceremony was on Friday. We've had a couple of days. A bunch of different expectations about how the event would be going. Tokyo's in a state of emergency right now. The creative director for the event just got fired. This is all sort of in the air, whatever. It's in the background. How does it seem to be going generally in your eyes so far?
For me, when I've watched the events that I've watched, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I've watched 60 hours of the Olympics over the weekend, but I did catch quite a few events. And I mean, the games are the games. That's the one thing I think it was a lot of drama leading up to it because you don't have anything to really take your mind off of. We're not watching the games and everything, so they're still putting everything together. But I think once they got past the ceremony, which went pretty good. I thought when I watched the replay of it, it looked pretty good, the opening ceremony. And all the games have gone the way you would expect them to. So there hasn't been any drama-filled things going wrong, cameras crashing or anything like that to this point. But, yes, there has been a lot of background turmoil with the Olympics leading to this point.
I was really worried. Like, I guess I kind of buy into the hysteria of working in news, right? You hear about all the bad things every day. I was so worried about what the Olympics would look like. It was just really nice to actually turn on the events and actually be like, this is the Olympics. Like, okay, we can actually just watch the athletes for the athletes, the events for the events, and just what it's supposed to be, detached from, it's not country against country and on the battlefield, it's country against country on the field of sport, which was actually really fun to get back into.
Simpler times, and that's the spirit. That it was like, it's the spirit of the Olympics. And this is, it's interesting, even the basketball conversation, because you have international people, everybody around the world coming together. Basketball is an American sport, but with the Olympics, over the course of a couple of decades, suddenly, I was watching women's taekwondo. Where does taekwondo come from? I forget. Suddenly, I saw like a Spanish woman playing against like a Thai woman. Pretty sure taekwondo didn't come from either of those places, and they were both really good at it.
Yes.
My point is this: it brings everybody together. That the spirit of competition, even though the sports or the particularities might come from all these far-flung places.
It's funny that you mentioned that one because, you know, the U.S. women's team won the gold.
Did we?
In
taekwondo?
In taekwondo.
Oh, really?
Congratulations.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Which was not one we were supposed to win.
The one I was watching, again, I've just watched a couple of things. It was Spain versus Thailand, and the Thai woman won. She did a very good job.
Very cool.
It's Korean, by the way. Just looked it up.
Oh, taekwondo? Thank you. Thank you. I think I knew that at one point, but thank you. All right. Speaking about far-flung places, the video that you sent with the dudes flinging themselves onto the anti-sex beds.
And we need to explain this. So the Olympic Village created these beds, cardboard beds or something like that. And people were calling them anti-sex beds because supposedly they were, collapsible or something like that?
To discourage you from
from getting it,
into the bed.
And this is a COVID condition, or this is something that they're trying to deter from COVID. So there were a bunch of guys who were going in and testing these beds, throwing their bodies onto the beds. I think there were like 3 guys just hulking out, throwing themselves onto the beds. The beds didn't break. The beds didn't break. So what does that mean for the capability in preventing people from having sex on their bed?
It opens the door.
Opens the door. Even a slow grind.
It's worth a shot.
The U.S. women's rugby team also did a video on that, and but they were also throwing each other on the bed, and then they were also like rocking it, kind of like treating it like a surfboard as well, trying to see it held up.
It didn't collapse.
What seems to be coming out after that, I was like, this can't be
Something
it,
can't be
right?
right.
Right. And so I looked it up, and what's happening now is it seems like the inventors of the bed were saying, like, we never said anything about it being anti-sex beds. That was just all made up. We were approached by the International Olympic Committee. They wanted recyclable beds.
Yeah.
That's what we made.
That's all it was.
Recyclable beds that are enforced properly.
So who decided to like get the marketing spin and be like, nobody can have sex on these beds? That's what we're going to make these guys known for. No.
And is that what they were looking for as a marketing ploy?
That's bizarre.
No one can have sex on these beds.
That's bizarre. Okay, so that was just
hilarious.
They got that wrong from the get-go. All right, we've kind of run it. Let's get into this fencing business.
Yeah, Alan, Hazik. So Alan Hazik grew up Montclair, New Jersey. He had to separately fly. His lawyer said he has not been permitted to stay in the Olympic Village. He has been residing in a remote hotel. The precautions were taken for his safety and the well-being of other fencers who expressed concern about his presence and desire to minimize distractions, according to USA Fencing. Now, Hazik faces accusations of sexual impropriety by 3 women in the incident that occurred from 2013 to 2015. At least 2 of the women were fencers who knew Hazik during the careers at Columbia University. Now, here's the weird part. So he was temporarily suspended from any fencing activities on June 2nd by the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, the nonprofit created as independent agency in 2017 to safeguard athletes. Hazik appealed, and his suspension was overturned by an arbiter on June 29th, restoring his Olympic eligibility. The arbiter left in place a directive for Hazik not to contact his accusers, but ruled that his suspension was, quote, inappropriate to the allegations, unquote, and found participation on the Olympic team to, quote, not be detrimental to the reputation for the United States or the sport, unquote. Now, if you have to take all of these precautions, should the guy be on the team? Meaning, if you got to go that far, I mean, they're not allowing him to stay in the village. He's taken, a separate flight right here. He's separately flying. He's not permitted to stay in the village. And it was other fencers who basically accused him of this. The team seemed to be on board with him not being there, and yet here he is. Should he be there? I think is the operative question, I guess, to start off. And any of you could take it. I'll go with you, Austin. We start with Cadell first.
I'm going to make some enemies here.
Uh-oh.
Yes, he should. He should absolutely be there.
Why.
Because why are you doling out punishment before conviction?
Interesting point.
Innocent until proven guilty. Allegations should not be the bar standard of when we can decide to end someone's career.
Right.
Allegations are exactly that, allegations. So maybe I think Safe Safe Play something was the company that was in charge of looking into his actions.
Yeah.
Maybe they took too long. Maybe we need to look into, okay, revamp your process because it's been 3 months or something. You guys haven't come out with anything, but nothing has been come out yet. He hasn't been convicted, so don't give him the punishment yet. And maybe if Safe Search doesn't come out with anything, then hit him back home with actual legal suit, because this is not a legal suit. This is just trying to prevent him from playing. And the Olympic Committee for fencing for the U.S. did those on purpose, so that way, just in case anyone felt unsafe, he's not practicing with the women's team. He's not staying in the same hotel as any other athlete. He's taking a completely separate flight. I think they're doing everything right here, without preventing him from doing what he signed up to do. So I think it's a very good compromise.
Cordell,
what is he there for?
Yeah.
I mean, what is it? I understand innocent until proven guilty, but to a degree.
Yeah.
To a degree. I mean, this guy's clearly got a history after reading the article. He's got a history of this. Quite a few people outside of just the accusers have put in statements against this guy.
Yeah.
He's not staying in a village. He's not practicing with the team. I mean, what experience is he even having? He's not a part of the team pretty much at all. He's an alternate.
Yeah.
So why even bring him into a situation where the team doesn't even want him around? The actual people who are going to be participating in the event don't feel comfortable with him there. They don't want to have anything to do with him. Why even push it? Is he that important to the team to have him there as an alternate is my thing.
What do you think, Shane?
I'll be honest, I'm kind of somewhere in between. I think you guys are both making pretty compelling cases. My case yesterday was closer to you, but Austin, to you, Cordell, but Austin, you reminded me of something useful. What I was saying yesterday was I didn't know exactly what it was coming in as. As him as an alternate, it makes even less sense to me than what I was saying back then. Because I was like, okay, is this the guy they want to win the gold medal?
Like he's a star player.
Even if he is cleared of all this guilt, this is where I think this argument goes slightly wrong. Those arguments are against him. They're having to put in extra resources to separate him from people, which means they're willing to admit that there may be something there. If he ends up being the alternate that wins the gold medal for the U.S., I don't know enough about fencing to know exactly how that would work, but if he swings it for us in a broader sense, do we want that stain? Even if admittedly, if he turns out to be innocent, that stain, I think, goes away. But even the suspicion, do we want that to be the representative of America, the person who's suspected, that we're having to put all these resources into clearing of this, into separating them so that they don't potentially harm anybody else? It just gets a little bit iffy. But on the other hand, Austin, I hear you completely. This is a uniquely, not just American principle, but a modern one, and I think that everybody around the world should take. You don't believe that somebody's guilty until you know that they're guilty. You don't really punish somebody until you know that they've actually done the thing of which you
can believe they're guilty. I'm not discounting any of the accusations, right?
But that's legal guilt,
right?
That's like
you can't administer punishment until they're proven guilty, and they're borderline on the punishment right now.
That's the government thing.
Well, now they're already segregating him.
Well, that's kind of my point. That's the government thing. They have to segregate him, and it's the government that says you're innocent until proven guilty. These other companies can take this different bar.
Exactly.
I mean, even if you were in civil court, the bar is not. Oh, everybody agrees.
But
the bar is far, far less in regards to conviction. These guys are taking a responsibility because they have the responsibility of all these other people on the team to deal with. I would not bring this guy. And I get your point, and I accept your point. Your point is right. If it was me and I didn't do it, I would feel horrible that they were doing this, especially, with the accusations, everything else. By the same token, I would not be the person that would be making a decision. It would be all of these other people that have to be, that would be under my responsibility, that if anything happened and they knew that this guy was problematic to begin with, that is a big, big problem.
Which is why they're separating it. And I commend that. I think that it just sets a really dangerous precedent. Yeah, which it's really easy to pick and choose your cases here when it's talking about sexual assault. Everyone wants to be oh, let's protect the woman. And I fully understand that and agree with that. But if you take anything else, maybe there's a thought of racism that this person might have been racist back in the day. Okay, maybe this person petty theft here and there. Take little bits here and there. Maybe this person smoked weed and it was illegal in that
spot. It's different than racism to me.
Yeah,
it's the precedent of accusing and then punishing.
That precedent should be, I would argue, as strong in regular society as it is for the government. what were courts of law originally? It was people stoning each other and getting up in tribes and kicking each other out of the communities. And if that's like a lot of the boycotting stuff, a lot of the boycotting stuff and kicking people out, canceling people, that's how that works today. And you know it. A lie can fly across the country before the truth takes its boots off.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I would hope that applies to our society. Those standards of holding people, No,
look, all things being equal, yes, but it's a lower standard of guilt from the standpoint of being outside of a courtroom. And even in courtrooms, the standard is different. It's not. Let's go to a break. Yeah.
Let's close it. You guys have been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming back with another 2 hours. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Shout out to the producers coming in. Those have been really good segments when they've been able to join us for that stuff. And it's funny, it started an argument in the room about like, well, what do you mean by that? I was trying to finish my thought, and we were coming to the end of the break, so it was the kind of difficulty to cross. In criminal courts, there's this thing of beyond all reasonable doubt, meaning when I convict this person, it has to be beyond all reasonable doubt. I have to know as a flat fact almost that the person is guilty. Doesn't work that way in practice, but the idea of it. But in civil courts, it's just a reasonable doubt, meaning it doesn't go beyond all reasonable doubt. The standard is different. This is from a government standpoint, though. I'm saying from the standpoint of an institution, the standard is different. And I accept Austin's point of view. It's correct. And the society should strive to, on some level, not convict people before the person has been convicted. So I get that, right? But institutions have different standards. It's just, and I have to, on some level, if I was head of that institution, pay attention to the concerns of the people who are there. I think they're trying to mind the gap by basically bringing the guy along and taking across all of these measures. I agree with Austin on this. I'm going to go through all that, especially as an alternate. I guess the more interesting thing, what if he wasn't an alternate? What if he was the best person on the team or the best person in the world?
Well, but also as a parting word, Austin said that we alternates are way more important than we're giving them credit for being.
Oh, I'm not trying to gut him as an alternate, and that's fair. But let's say he was the greatest alternate ever.
And that alternates are like more important than the main player.
Yeah.
And the main answer.
It's an interesting case, but let's go to the headlines. In the news, about 14,637 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 49 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 51,939 cases per day, an increase of 170% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 56% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,405,954 people across the United States and has killed 610,463 human beings. So unfortunate. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey said, quote, "It's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks," unquote, for the rising COVID cases in the United States. I want to come back to that. Governor GOP Representative Clay Higgins of Louisiana said yesterday that he and his wife have contracted COVID-19 for a second time, referring to the virus as a, quote, "Chinese Communist Party biological attack weaponized virus," unquote. Unquote.
You see what I'm saying with it being a mouthful, right? It's like a lot of words.
It's a lot of words. If you wanted to be this belligerent, Chinese Communist Party biological attack, maybe it just seems so over the top. But okay, fair enough. He got his point across. Tell me how you really feel. The Department of Justice had decided to drop a probe into Andrew Cuomo investigating whether or not his administration violated the rights of nursing home residents. In the last week, the United States has had 915 shootings and 430 people dead amidst a massive crime spike, violent crime spike, in the last few months. I want to come back to that also. There are ongoing clashes outside of the parliament in Tunisia following the president's decision to suspend the legislature today, which has been decried as a coup by main parties in the country. The Speaker of Parliament began a sit-in at the building, which troops have sealed, as outside rival party constituencies backing the president and the Speaker of Parliament threw stones at one another. New records for the United Nations show Afghanistan civilians have been killed in record numbers in the first half of this year, with militants for the Taliban having captured approximately 50% of the country's territory, with the Taliban saying they've captured 85% of the country's territory. President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines gave his last State of the Nation address to the country he's led for the last 5 years, starting with a brutal anti-crackdown or anti-drug crackdown as the nation continues to deal with the coronavirus crisis, and the economy of the Philippines faces a long road to recovery. Yeah, Duterte was killing drug dealers.
Duterte. Duterte.
Oh, Duterte. Thank you. Duterte. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, he was killing drug dealers. It was this wild crackdown. Crackdown is an understatement. 136 students were kidnapped for ransom out of the Nigerian school in late May. The families and the school administrators were able to raise $30 million, basically $73,000, that was demanded. Then, this past weekend, the criminals abducted the man, delivering the money to them, keeping both the cash and the children. Parents are now resigned to fate and God, as raising more money is nearly impossible for them. And the amount has to do with 30 million naira and less. The FAA has classified Jeff Bezos as, quote, not, unquote, an astronaut. While their definition includes reaching 50 miles above sea level, passengers must, quote, demonstrate activities during flight that were essential to public safety or contributed to human space flight safety, unquote. Due to the fully automated nature of Blue Origin flight, no one on New Shepard will receive their wings. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, a few quick things on the Duterte. I had a nurse that was from the Philippines. And, you know, when we're having this conversation, when this came up, she basically would say, well, drugs are bad in the Philippines. I was like, wait, he's killing drug dealers and she's like, yeah, I don't care. It's bad. Now, her thing was perfectly, I've known this woman for years, and I was kind of shocked at how, and the way she came out, but she's there, she lives there, right? And so this was her perspective of somebody who's lived there. So I don't want to come over as like I am uber confident in my perspective on like, whoa, he's killing drug dealers. That seems intense. But I don't know the conditions to which the Philippines are in, so fair enough. It just seems bad on its face. But the other story to this, it's right here. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey. Well, that's rich of these people now saying, oh yeah, this is a horrible thing and we just need to blame the unvaccinated. Yeah, what about the people who are basically given a safe space to the unvaccinated? I mean, the Fox Newses of the world, the Kay Iveys of the world, the governors of the world that were angry at the mask or annoyed with the mask or didn't necessarily want to push the people to get the vaccines. Even here, her thing is like, well, people should just do it. And it's like, yeah, but you're in government. You're the governor. Aren't you supposed to, govern? Well, I just think people should have their individual liberty and people should just do things. This is not a magical world. Just because you give people individual liberty and say, okay, once I give people freedom, they're going to do the right thing with the freedom. What if they don't? What if they don't? This is the lefty stuff too, right? Lefties get in trouble with this. Like you have these humanitarian, well, I can't say you're a humanitarian lefty, but you go into a country, you smash it to bits, and you say, all right, and we're going to correct this country because this brutal dictator was in charge, and we're now going to get rid of this dictator, and the world is going to go to puppies and rainbows. It's like, oh my God, there's a civil war. I didn't realize the dictator was stopping the civil war. It's that nonsense. Just because you do something doesn't necessarily mean what you do turns out magically right. Whether that's the humanitarian wars that people go into, or whether it's Kay Ivey and some of these people that believe individual liberty is it, that I would just say, I'll give people the right to make a choice, and they would make the right choice. What if they don't, Kay? What if they don't? And that's the question, Shane. What if they don't? What if they don't make the right choice? Meaning, if you're the governor of a state, You don't want to do mass mandates. Fair enough. You don't want to push people to get vaccines. Fair enough. Because you think those things are individual liberty stuff. And you get a vaccine because you say, look, I want my vaccine. I want to be safe. And I expect people to do it. And they don't. So you get like 40% vaccination rates. It may be even 30. I think hers is like 38%. What do? Do you just get on and scream that it's the fault of the unvaccinated? You're the governor. Govern. What do you do?
So what? Make people get vaccines? What are you actually proposing? How should she govern?
It's not that I'm proposing that she forced people to get vaccines. I am proposing that she was more aggressive on this notion of this is something good, this is something we should push, this is something that we need. That's higher.
Yeah, but what else is she not only is she allowed to do, but should she do as an American governor? I'll put it like this. Do you want her to mandate vaccines? If not, what are you actually proposing?
I do want her to mandate masks. And I do want her to vigorously push the vaccine thing. Yes. Mandate, no. Mandate is weird to me.
Isn't that what she's doing here? Okay, so the one difference that you'd want from her is for her to make people wear masks. That's the one thing.
That's one thing, but I would have preferred this to be done sooner. That's my point. As opposed to going for several months into this where the numbers started to tick up and everything else.
She might have been saying this kind of thing over the past couple of months, and we're only reporting on her getting extremely severe as she's... you can read the article where in another part of her address, she's describing... This is, you know, those people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, they usually have a lot of followers. Sometimes they do it on Instagram too. And they're like, I was having a conversation with my 3-year-old today, and they were describing the problems they see in Nigeria and how they really wish Republican congressional leaders would sign this bill. My 3-year-old, you know what I mean? Yeah. She's describing, and okay, so that's a joke. This is a serious situation. She's describing she goes into a hospital and she meets a young woman there who's dying and begging her for a vaccine. I can see that potentially happening. I don't know.
You think she's lying?
I kind of think she's lying. But that's where she's gone, is my point, Jamarl. She's describing in fairly vivid imagery, went into a hospital, there was this girl who's dying. And she begged me for a vaccine, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't give you one, it's too late. That's what she's saying. That's the level she's gone to, Jamarl. That's my point, whether it's true or it's false. That's the narrative that she started to bring out, and unless you want her to mandate vaccines.
No.
This is the bastion of what she's supposed to do as a governor of a state that leans right, would seriously push back. You say she should mandate it. Do you want to...
She should mandate it. I've told you.
You said masks. You said masks. I'm talking about masks now.
Yes.
You want to say she should mandate masks? Think about the pushback, though. What would that pushback look like? And then what does she do? Does Biden come down with a National Guard when people refuse to do it? When entire towns and cities and mayors, and she has to bring people up on charges, and they refuse to do it because they say that this is a violation. My point is, I'm just pushing back, sort of.
There's all sorts of things that people may dislike. I mean, that's just kind of part for the course. The catch is, are you trying to keep the public safe or not? It's your job as governor to do so. And I accept the pushback. You're going to get pushback in all of these places, especially now. We've been a year into this. People had the vaccines and they thought they had this glimmer. It's like as you're the light at the end of the tunnel. And it ended up being a moving bus.
Well, and surely the war on drugs works. Surely because drugs harm people, just preventing them from taking them, they'll like that. That'll work. That'll solve the problem. No, preventing people from wearing masks, they refuse you. And if you live in a state where the most people don't want to wear masks, most people are going to refuse you. And look at what that does to your legitimacy. Everybody sees that nobody follows you. And then who do they listen to? Not you.
Businesses?
Their buddy on Facebook, whatever.
Who's going to refuse you from doing the mask stuff? The businesses are going to refuse. The business is going to say, yes, screw the Alabama governor. I'm not going to do the mask stuff.
Yes, I've seen that happen. A bunch of small businesses doing that.
Most won't. And if they started getting cracked down on, I guarantee you they would change their policies. I don't buy this argument. I don't buy this argument. But then the governor comes out and says, I'm going to mandate masks, and people are just, I don't care about the governor. I don't buy that. Then yes, it's a red state. Still, I don't buy it. And by the way, my point is not so much that she's coming to Jesus now. I'm glad she's coming to Jesus now. My point is, early on, where we needed these Republican governors to come to Jesus, these guys didn't want to come to Jesus. If she went to the hospital and she had that moment of clarity, fair enough. I don't care whether she had that moment of clarity or not. That moment of clarity has been happening to the tune of 610,000 human beings all across the United States. Do I care that the governor may be dicey about that stuff in her state? And look, there's even a question of, is she taking a position because that's the position of the people in her state? Meaning, I know that the population has this position. And regardless of what I think, at the end of the day, I could be politically injured by that. That could be totally true.
But is that not her job, too, though, to represent her constituents and respond to their interests and needs and demands, first and foremost?
No, her job is in a weird way, this is going to be somewhat of a weird argument, but on some level, her job is to ensure that those people safe, living, etc.
But what if they disagree with her? What if they don't want to do what she wants them to do?
That's not her job. Her job has to do with keeping them safe and decide.
Well, wait,
meaning,
what do you mean? What do you mean that's not her job?
Like,
What's
for example,
not her job?
What do you
not
think
her
the job of the president of the United
Her
States?
job is not to do what they wanted to do.
Not exactly, no.
No, so she's supposed to do other than what they wanted her to do.
On some level, yes.
That sounds like representative democracy. That sounds healthy.
That's literally representative democracy. That's in fact, that is the literal reason why it's representative as opposed to being just a straight democracy.
Okay, so if 1% of the population wants the president to do something,
what's number 1%? And the numbers are ridiculous.
So if it's 35 or 40% of the population,
I have no idea what those numbers are.
Okay,
I don't know what that means. I'm just telling you that the responsibility and role of a particular leader in a representative government is not mob mentality.
It's to know better than the population and to do better.
On some level, in some issues, yes.
I hear you. So across the board on a major...
Is that wrong? Tell me if I'm wrong on that.
I think that there's a middle ground here, but I don't think that the middle ground justifies going very far in one direction, which is what you would say. If the majority of people are publicly protesting and have been for over a year...
That's not the majority. What are you talking about?
As far as I can tell, there are a lot of people out there.
There's just a lot of people protesting. That doesn't mean the majority. You could have... How big is this country? What, 300 million people? How many people you get to the White House? You can get 1 million people to the White House. That's nothing.
Fair enough.
That's
okay,
nothing.
So say 30%, say 40%, say the rest don't care. Some people really want it, other people don't care.
Yeah.
30%. Say it is a majority.
Wait, you mean the mask?
Say it is a majority. Yeah, taking the mask exactly.
Well,
say
if
it
that's
is
a majority, then the previous argument doesn't even make sense.
Which
if
one?
It's a majority, because I think it is a majority. I think I've said earlier on and months ago that you're going to get a situation where there's this kind of weird juxtaposition where the public changes over from, look, I've gotten vaccinated, so I don't want to wear my mask. And you're going to get less unity on that. Meaning you may get a 50-50 split among people saying, I got vaccinated, I'm sick of wearing these masks. And some other people saying, just not getting vaccinated. I guess, I hope you get my point, right? You may get that split. What is the governor to do in that situation? And at some point, it becomes the governor's choice in regards to whether to lead or not. I'm one of these people that think that having less than 610,000 people dying would have been better for this country. That's where I'm at. And I know part of that is the social distancing, the masks, and the vaccines.
Here's where it gets screwed up with me, Jamarl. The lockdowns and everything, I look at the economic cost, I look at how much money we've spent on this, and I look at the total number of deaths, and I can't help but think that if we had thrown this much money, this much time, this much attention into preventing deaths from cancer, from high blood pressure, from obesity, et cetera, if we had done that, if we had stopped on a dime, we could have saved far more lives. Arbitrarily making that change than we have prevented or saved by doing this whole lockdown thing in response to COVID. So there's a constant crisis lingering in the air like a sort of Damocles that can present itself to us at any point that we can seize onto to solve these things. But, weirdly enough, we get pushed into these corners like we did with this one.
It works that way. I suspect it works that way more so because it is hard to get anything, like money-wise, to fix something. You can get the money afterwards. Meaning we can have the disaster, and you can get the money after disaster, but you can't get the money in order to stop the disaster. Whether that's with COVID, whether it's healthcare, pretty much anything else. It seems to be par for the course for us as human beings. It's unfortunate.
I think that not getting the money is part of it. I think that simply people aren't aware of things until they're presented with them on some level. I also think if you look back at COVID, say we'd done the dropping the hammer. We'd locked down things really intensely in the first couple of weeks, like late February, but forget March, late February. We'd done an international lockdown before everybody knew this was a thing. What would the public response have been? It would have been that this is a crazy, crazy, crazy over-response to nothing, literally nothing. This has killed, what, a couple dozen people around the world, and you want to shut down the entire globe? Now, that would have been the most effective. Hindsight is 20/20. If you shut everything down for a couple of weeks, theoretically, it just doesn't exist, and we don't have to face any of this. But you can't justify it at the time, and that kind of applies to any given crisis that you face, including global warming.
I totally understand your take on that one. But we saw China do it. Like, my thing kept being, China is not going through all of this for nothing. And it was like they went through a brutal, brutal shutdown.
100% true. And that's where people started to freak out. That's where I started to freak out. I'm like, okay, wait, whoa. China does this. Now Russia does this. Wait, hang on a second.
They're building hospitals?
They're taking this really seriously.
They're taking this really seriously. It was that for me. And I think I had that impression like in March or April or something like that.
It would have been March, I think.
Yeah. So I accept certain number of lives lost. 100,000, 200,000. 600,000. Oh my God. And even accepting the 200,000 on some level, that may be an issue of our own personal health or lack thereof health.
Yeah, I think that Mark Frost, he and I disagree on some things, but he's an abatement specialist, balancing positives and negatives. What do you get? What do you lose for any given decision? The lockdown, that whole thing, we kind of touched on it briefly. I've been questioning myself on this. I want to come back to it. I also want to do more research to make sure I'm right. But this question of like, what was worth it? What would have been the most effective way to respond to this? What did we do?
If you could look back in time and say, okay, what was the rational thing to take it? Because you're right, 12 people, and it's like nationwide shutdown.
Exactly.
It's difficult to pull that off. So
And it's
especially you're
impossible
never
to
gonna
pull
get
that.
that with
It's
a Republican.
impossible to pull that off. Yeah.
But then when you get a national or international freak out, so it's like, all right, where's the number that's rational to respond to in that moment? Like, you know, it's like X number of people dying in New York, et cetera, et cetera. So I was like, all right, we have to do something.
And even just lockdowns, I'll put it like this. I hope that I will ultimately be proven wrong about the successfulness of lockdowns. Right now, I'm still in the camp. Lockdowns worked. They were worth it.
Yeah.
I've kind of been wavering on that, but I decidedly in that camp. I hope I'm wrong about that, because if you think about it, if those don't work,
then
you
have nothing else.
Well, but here's the thing. If I think we do have other stuff. We've got vaccines. There are other ways to deal with this.
Well, yeah,
if the lockdowns don't work, then we don't have to do them again in the future, which will be very good in future pandemics. I don't know how else to say this. If there are other ways of solving it than lockdowns, those are like horrible for the economy, for people's psychology. And it doesn't even, the virus is still spreading. It's just keeping on coming back. It's yo-yoing.
Yeah, the virus is still spreading, though, because we basically started to think that this is done. I mean,
but that's how it works. That's how it works. I
etc.
saw this coming a year plus ago, Jamarl. That's how it goes. It's like, okay, you can see all this stuff going on because it's just simple psychology. How are people going to respond at that date when this situation kicks in? When the case count drops really low and people are like, okay, I want to get free again. I want to go outside again. What do? They start going outside again, which means the cases go back up. And so you get this perpetual yo-yoing. And then there were only vaccines could come in and stop that. We were hoping they would for a while. Then you add variants, and then it's like booster shots. And then, okay, how much of the population are actually going to get the vaccines and the booster shots going forward? It becomes this whole long thing. And then I hear people who are skeptical of vaccines and skeptical of lockdowns and skeptical of everything. They're like, you guys are slippery slope. You keep extending your argument. You keep moving the goalposts. What are we supposed to do? At first it was masks. Then it was mask and vaccine, or vaccines without masks. Now it's vaccines with masks. I hear them, but there's also an internal logic to it. And sadly, this whole thing, including that argument, it's entirely foreseeable.
Yeah.
All of this could have been foreseen.
Yeah. That juxtaposition between the politics versus the thing. So let's end this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join us in conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So Shane and I have been having a conversation on the election that has taken place in Israel, whether or not Bibi Netanyahu is really on the outs, and really looking at this new government that has been formed, that is being this new government that's been formed. And the interesting thing about the government that has been formed has to do with this notion of the way it sees the Palestinian Authority. And especially in the last conflict between Hamas and the Palestinian and Israel. The interesting thing in that is that the conversation was taking place with the thing of Hamas, not the Palestinian Authority. It seemed as if the Palestinian Authority had been sidelined. And on some level, this has to do with what is a perception that they were working too closely with the Israeli government. To have a conversation about this, there's an article, Israel, U.S. discusses strengthening Palestinian Authority. Well, why would they strengthen Palestinian Authority? They would do so in order to undermine the strength that Hamas has gained. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Elijah Magnier. Elijah Magnier is a veteran war correspondent. You can find his reporting on elijahjm.wordpress.com. Elijah, Did I explain that correctly? It's a little bit tortured. We were getting you in, and we were able to get you in at the last minute, so I appreciate it. But this was one of the stories that I had flagged because I was interested in a conversation about it. But did I explain this correctly on first hand before we go forward?
Well, yes, hello. Thank you for having me today. I think you said it rightly. Yes, I do agree with you.
So explain this for me and explain this for the audience. Basically, the Palestinian Authority was, I want to say, subverted, or let's say undermined in the last military conflict between Hamas and Israel. With being sidelined on something like this, I mean, they're basically using this as a political instrument for their interests against Palestinian interests. Certainly the Palestinians could see this, meaning the very act of doing this undermines the very act, if that makes sense. Or am I saying this incorrectly?
Well, actually what's happening between the Palestinians is first and above all are the elections of the presidential elections of President Mahmoud Abbas. And President Abbas has been there for years and trying to postpone the elections because he knows very well that he's not going to be re-elected and that the Palestinians want to change and want to remove him from power. However, his presence is very suitable for the Americans and the Israelis, and they find in Mahmoud Abbas a very good partner in the good relationship, good cooperation on security measure and the security of Israel and the West Bank, and also the bad relationship between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza. So by taking advantage of this bad relationship and inter-Palestinian bickering or conflicts between the Palestinian in Gaza and the West Bank over the change of the Palestinian leadership, the Israelis are happy to support Mahmoud Abbas to stay in power for as long as they can. And Mahmoud Abbas, on the other hand, is helping the Israelis by stopping any Palestinian uprising in the West Bank. However, he failed to do so in the last war, the Israeli war on Gaza, when we saw many Palestinian cities uprising, including Palestinians who were born in Palestine and they have the Israeli nationality. And that was the key where they all stood up against what Israel was doing against the Palestinian and the bombing of Gaza and the acts against Jerusalem and the eviction of the Palestinian families in Jerusalem. This has created a solidarity and excluded Mahmoud Abbas from being included in by the Palestinian people. And not only Mahmoud Abbas found himself excluded, but also Israel suffered from exclusion worldwide for his action against the Palestinian families and against bombing indiscriminately Gaza, including destroying the infrastructure, targeting journalists, targeting buildings that have nothing to do with the conflict, and basically targeting civilians. And that also affected badly Mahmoud Abbas, who is sitting in power and doing very little about changing the situation in favor of the Palestinians, and particularly the Oslo Agreement that gives theoretically a state for the Palestinian. And Mahmoud Abbas is keep continuing saying that I don't believe in armed struggle, in armed resistance. I want negotiation, I want a peaceful negotiation, and he's getting nowhere with a peaceful negotiation because the Israeli leadership are saying clearly, we do not want to give a state to the Palestinians.
Well, not just that. With that logic, you don't have to. I mean, under that logic, that can go for the next 100 years. I mean, meaning, what power? And let's take this as a different route. Let's say he was more provocative. What could he do in the situation to which he's in to, let's say, better the situation for Palestinians?
The first thing he can do is stop arresting the Palestinians who contest the Israeli wrongdoing against the Palestinian population. So what Mahmoud Abbas is doing is he's arresting Palestinians who demonstrate and who stands against the Israeli aggression and violation of human rights and international laws. And also, Mahmoud Abbas threatened several times to stop the security cooperation with Israel, and then the US interfered to convince him not to do so, and then the cooperation returned, and the cooperation on security level means arresting any Palestinian that is carrying out any act that goes against the interest of Israel, not Palestine, Israel.
But when you say any action, are you speaking? You say any action? You're talking about violence. Is this partly a euphemism for violence, which again can be justified or unjustified? I'm not even trying to get into that conversation, but anything against Israel could include flipping them the bird or something like that from across the border, which I'm guessing wouldn't apply, but I might be wrong. What exactly are you talking about there, Elijah?
I'm talking about a Palestinian demonstrate on the border of the West Bank. They get fired at by the Israeli Defense Forces and most of the time killed. And the Palestinians who are there, who continue demonstrating, have no right to do so according to the Palestinian Authority, because this is considered a provocation against the Israeli bullets.
I mean, wow, that's amazing. And so basically he's running it for Israel for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and the second most important step to do is to allow democratic election among the Palestinians, to allow candidates to come forward and to run a new election instead of sitting there for over a decade and not willing to leave the post.
But his fear is that he would lose that election, basically.
But that's democracy.
Yeah, that is democracy. I'm not patting him on the back for doing for doing that. I guess I'm saying from his standpoint, they would lose. And this gets into Israel's thinking of this stuff. If Hamas, who seems to be the other political force in Gaza and the West Bank, it seems like they would win it. And tell me if I'm wrong on this. Would they win it? And what would that mean for Palestine?
Well, let us be clear. Hamas did not take the power by force. Hamas was elected. And there was election in Gaza, and Hamas won. And if they renew the election this year or next year or any further in the years to come, and Hamas will win, because Hamas represents the voice of the Palestinians, who understands that Israel is never going to give them a land, is never going to allow Palestinians who were forced to flee the country to return to their land. The Israelis are confiscating the Palestinian territory and homes, demolishing any house. And this is what Hamas is saying, you can't do that. On the other hand, the Palestinian Authority can no longer defend the West Bank that was given by the agreement, the international agreement. And every few years, we see Israel taking a little bit of the part called the C area and then the B area, and then say, no, you can't use the water. If you want to build, you need our approval. But then we have 1 out of 10,000 demand that are approved by the Israelis to Palestinians to build the house. And we have 10,000 out of 10,000 Israeli demand who are approved.
And the bias there is clear. But I mean, Hamas, what about the claims, Elijah, that Hamas was founded by Israel?
Well, it's like the claim that Israel supported Iran and financed it and supplied it with weapons. This is not true, because there were elections in Gaza and there were re-election in Gaza, and again, Hamas won.
Yeah, from the standpoint of Hamas winning those elections, if you think ahead to me for a moment, let's say those elections were held, and let's say Hamas did take both. What happens? I guess what I'm trying to get to is if you had a viable coalition that was all pushing in the same direction, organized, where there wasn't this conflict between the West Bank and Gaza, what could they potentially get done. I mean, I get saying we don't like this, but I've watched Hamas launch those missiles and everything else back and forth and this kind of pushback and resistance. The catch is, though, Israel started back taking land almost immediately. So let's say for the moment that both of these guys are organized. What can they do? I understand that organization gives the largest push for opposition for something like this. But what could they potentially do?
Who can do? I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
So what I'm asking is, if Hamas, or let's say if Gaza and the West Bank were in similar alignment, let's say they were politically in alignment, what could they potentially do to extricate themselves from this particular situation? Because I agree with you. I don't think Israel has any plans on giving back land. And it seems that using the United States as cover, they would just expropriate more and more and more as they move on. So if Hamas got what they wanted and they had a unified front for Gaza and the West Bank, what could they potentially get accomplished for the Palestinians?
That's a good question.
And by the way, one more thing. Would the Palestinians be willing to pay it as the cost?
Well, that's a very good question. First of all, we saw in the last war on Gaza that the Palestinians are ready to pay the cost. And when we saw the uprising in so many cities at the same time, simultaneously, including those who had never seen an uprising, that means the Palestinian people are aware that there is a price to be paid for their freedom. The Palestinians are not saying we don't want Israel to be here. We don't want the Israelis to be here. The Palestinians are saying we accept two states, and the Israelis are saying we want only a state only for the Jews. They're not saying this is a state for everybody to live in. They say only Jews can live in. Well, the Arabs are Christian and Muslim, and they're not Jews. It means, according to Israeli philosophy, they cannot stay in that land. That is the land of their ancestors and the land where they have properties. Secondly, what Gaza and West Bank can do, the solidarity among the Palestinians stopped the war on Gaza. The solidarity among the Palestinians in the last war created a new situation where the Israelis had to bow to stopping the indiscriminate bombing and the killing of the Palestinians and thinking that there is no accountability. When the Palestinians are divided and they're not united in Gaza and in the West Bank, it's very easy to create more havoc and to speak about the differences among the Palestinians and not what is happening to the state of the Palestinians that the whole world promised to in Oslo in the 1990s. This is a difference. When there is a solidarity among the Palestinians, they dictate their will, and they force the Israelis to stop this bloody war that is going on since 1945. And then they force the Israelis to think differently, not to use only their guns and their weapons that are mainly supplied by the Americans to kill the Palestinians and to attack other countries and to live in peace with other people who are on the same territory.
If unity were all that we were talking about, it depends on what kind of unity we're talking about. I mean, Abbas, again, not popular locally, certainly from what you're saying, and Hamas, they seem to be, but it doesn't seem like Hamas would represent everybody. They're an Islamist organization, and I don't know that the Palestinian territories would try to be an entirely Islamic territory. This is, again, I know that I am slightly out of my depth. I guess I'll pause there for a second. What's your take on that? The idea that Hamas is a specifically religious organization and that the Palestinian territories don't necessarily want to, as a nation, fall under that religious banner. What's your take on that, Elijah?
Yes, thank you. So for the West Bank, the candidate is Marwan Barghouti, and who is not a religious candidate. He is from the Palestinian, he is the son of al-Fatah. He is part of the establishment, let's say, in the West Bank. That's one. Two, the Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood, and we saw the Muslim Brotherhood ruling Turkey. President Erdogan is a member of NATO. This is not something bad if Muslims rule a country. What is bad is the humanitarian relationship and rights of the people to survive and live in peace with their neighbors. Is the world allowing people to live in peace and worship whatever they want, and as long as they are not causing havoc to other countries, we see the Palestinians in Israel and in Palestine uprising for a specific request: return of all the refugees and have a state. This is all what they are asking. They can worship whatever they want, but they're asking only to live in peace on their territory. They're not asking to go and conquer other states like ISIS and Al-Qaeda were doing, or to go and attack the Americans. On the contrary, they want the Americans to be a viable partner in any peace process. And they went to talk to the Americans, they went to Qatar, they went to Turkey, and they're going anywhere. They went to Madrid for the peace process, they went to Oslo, and they want to talk to the West and seek the West help. So if they are Muslim Brotherhood and they are Muslims, who cares? It's their problem.
One of the questions I want to bring up has to do with the new government that Naftali Bennett has formed. This government is put together with several parties, and if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, a Palestinian group is part of the government structure now currently.
Well, Naftali Bennett managed to form a government because the world is a bit fed up with Benjamin Netanyahu. And he's been there since 15 years, ruling the country, provoking countries around him, trying always to raise the flag of attacking Iran and continue attacking Syria, etc. Not that Naftali Bennett is any better.
No. That's not where I'm going with that. I guess I'm saying his governmental structure included the United Arab List Party. And under normal circumstances, Arab parties aren't necessarily allowed, or ideally, in a way that it kind of just operates, don't necessarily tend to form government coalitions. I mean, the Israeli government tends to not work with the Arab parties, correct? I guess I'm saying it's different.
Yeah, that's true. The coalition formed by Naftali Bennett may not survive for long because of the bouquet of different political groups, including the Arab parties, that have voted for him to get rid of Netanyahu. Bennett may not survive for very long, but for now, he's doing well.
How is it operated in practice? Meaning having an Arab party associated with the governmental structure. How has it been different than the previous governments?
For the previous government, the Arab party had no say in it. Now they are involved in the government and they have their word. This is how they were included in the new government, with all different other parties that were rejecting their presence because they said there is no place for an Arab party to be in a government that belongs to the Jew only. That was the philosophy of Netanyahu.
They're also voting against Netanyahu, to be clear, though, right? It's not like that this new coalition, like you said, which could fall apart at any moment, as much of the peculiarities of the Israeli political system as to the inherent cultural conflicts going on there, arguably. But that government could fall apart at any moment. It's not like they're just going to, it's not like they necessarily have a voice at the table in any more, in a real de facto sense necessarily. Do you think that they're actually able to sway any decision making? I'll put it like that, Elijah.
What is important is it's the first time a Palestinian citizen of Israel, who represent 20% of the country population, are included in the government. That is new. It never happened before.
Yeah.
And this gives a significance to the people who are Palestinian holding an Israeli citizenship and saying, well, finally, there is someone who represents us. We agree or disagree with this party.
But I remember in the United States, that might be small consolation. That is a far smaller coup or victory or success for the Palestinians than a black person winning the presidency in the United States. And that did not, to be clear, solve racial problems in America. I'm not saying there's a cause here, but it was under Obama's second term that you had like the re-incitement of a lot of like latent racial tension, which came to fruit in the Black Lives Matter protests, which are still living through this day. I mean, I could see something similar happening, among Palestinians if they see their quote-unquote representatives not representing them as the Israeli government continues to do what it has done consistently, which is continue to take territories, just do what it does. I mean, do you see that potentially happening? That might be small consolation right now. That might, calm some things. But in the long run, if those representatives aren't able to represent, that might just lead to a lot more uprising, a lot more violence potentially. Elijah, what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's good for this new government to have an Arab representation in it, because it is giving a new vision of what the Israeli are willing to do with the people who live with them on the same territory. And that give a good example for the future, where these people can no longer be ignored.
You know,
and this is, sorry?
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say I'm less cynical than Shane on this one, I think. I see this as being dramatically a positive development. I mean, this is something that's never happened before. In a Jewish state, you have Palestinians, basically Muslims, or basically Arabs, getting to say. I was looking at this right here. In a blow to Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Israel's parliament failed to renew a controversial law that prevented Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza from getting residency in Israel after they marry a Palestinian with Israeli citizenship. The Tuesday vote was 59-59. The law required a simple majority to pass. And again, this was because they basically said no. That's never happened. Like, that could have never happened without these guys being part of the government. I don't know. I guess I look at this and think, does this give a view to the future of what things could be in a combined state? Or does it devolve?
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, it gives a clear contradiction of what Israel is saying, that this is a state for the Jews, when there are Palestinians who were given a citizenship and they are Israeli citizens. Therefore, it contradicts to say that this is not a state for the Jew. It's a state for the Israelis, and there is a state for the Palestinian that needs to be sorted out. So we can't say this is a state for the Jew and have Palestinian citizens of Israel living there and recognized and saying, well, you can have Israeli citizenship, but you're not in the state of Israel because it belongs to the Jews.
And that's almost like a foot in the door in terms of opening it up demographically and in terms of religions. But here's the thing. Isn't that more an Abbasian style tactic than a Hamas style tactic? But, you know, political participation and seeking reconciliation through political means as opposed to violent resistance, and, you know, and as opposed to seeking international support for independence. The Mahmoud Abbas tactic, that seems to be broadly the one that we're describing right now. It seems like if you're right and I'm wrong and it works, won't that be under the Mahmoud Abbas style of pursuing things? And also, wouldn't the Hamas, you know, more aggressive tactics, more violence, wouldn't that completely undercut the Abbas style thing, which is the one that it seems is being pursued right now? Isn't Abbas actually winning, Elijah?
Absolutely not. Abbas is not willing, and he felt the ground under his feet burning in the last war, where Israel was the main contributor of bringing more Palestinians next to the Palestinian resistance. That is what Israel has created. And this new awareness is increasing in Palestine, indicating that first, Mahmoud Abbas is wrong because he can't hold the power for such a long time and refuse over the election. Second, his policy gave nothing to the Palestinian. And what you're saying that, well, Hamas is wrong and Abbas is right in his policy, well, what the Palestinians has achieved so far, that's one. Two, what can Israel do with Gaza? Israel can never eliminate Gaza, can never occupy Gaza. So what are you going to do with a couple of million Palestinians living in Gaza? Where do you go with these people to? You can't. It is a fact that the Palestinians live on a Palestinian land. A dense territory is also belong to the Palestinian, and the tactic of Mahmoud Abbas is failing. And because it's attracting more people in support of Hamas. That is a result.
Elijah, we got to come back to this conversation sometime, because I'm glad to have hit upon what seems to be a fundamental and important fault line in this whole thing. And Jamarl brought up a good point, you know, just briefly, which is how, part of the distinction here is internal Palestinian Authority domestic politics versus how they're choosing to relate to Israel. In my view, they're pursuing more Abbas-style tactics in the way that they relate to Israel, or in the Israeli representation. That's what's happening, at least. That path seems to be, you know, showing signs of potentially working. Again, if especially if you lean more in in your direction than you would have in mine based on that conversation. But domestically, Hamas is still, it's getting more popular, still as popular as ever. And they're still going to be pursuing that. Anyway, contradictions and complexities we might want to resolve some other time. Elijah Magnier, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Elijah Magnier, veteran war correspondent. Find his reporting at his website, elijahjm.wordpress.com. Also follow him on Twitter at EJMAllRye. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back taking your calls on the other side of this break. 202-521-1320. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Lines.
And we're back taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Jamarl and I continuing the argument over there. Well, not even, I don't know, kind of an argument.
I think it's just an interesting conversation.
It is.
We're talking about this notion of a contradiction in styles. That basically you have a situation where, let's say, Abbas, who, look, I think Abbas is failing miserably, and the fact that he can't have that election gets across that he doesn't necessarily have the public support because of the way he's been going about it. The catch is, Abbas is not in a situation where the politics of it works. It's like you're in a war situation and you're just saying, okay, man, I'm going to do politics. And it doesn't entirely work that way. You need somewhat of a more aggressive representation. However, if that is Hamas and these guys are on somewhat of a warlike footing, now, mind you, again, elected, does have the support of the occupied group. Then you get to Israel, and for the first time, they've had a Palestinian group get wedged into the government. That's never happened. That's why I was so shocked by it. I think we had this conversation, I forget the last gentleman who we had on, and I brought up the fact that they had Palestinians within the government. That was something that shouldn't be there. If it's a Jewish state, what do you mean you have Palestinians making decisions in a Jewish state? It's that stuff. And so it's like you have this kind of weird contradiction between this group of Palestinians working within the governmental structure and this other group that is basically on a wartime footing that is in occupied territory.
Yeah.
There's a contradiction on some level at some point, especially if Abbas loses and you have this aggressive group.
Because what I was saying is I don't think that would work. I don't see how that works. If you have official Palestinian representation, which if I take your word for it is a real big deal.
Oh, don't take my word for it. It's never happened before. Think of it like civil rights here.
I get it, but I brought up the exact, you brought up civil rights, I brought up Obama, and we talk all the time about tokenism and how that doesn't solve anything. So seeing a Palestinian in an Israeli seat, okay, then in the Knesset, okay, that might make you feel a certain way, but is that actually going to change anything in the long run? That's where I would go.
Yes. Back in 2021, no.
And whichever applies more, and the facts of that, I don't know. Those are up to the audience to resolve for themselves. My point is, if you have political representation for the first time, and yet if Hamas is in charge of the Palestinian Authority, then they're going to be completely undercutting the political representation that they have in the Knesset. Because on the one hand, the only chance they have of influencing the Israeli political process directly, through representative legislative means, through the Knesset, through the Palestinians in the Knesset, at the same time as those people are sitting in those seats trying to make arguments, they're having to constantly defend all of the Hamas militants who would be getting into fights constantly. It wouldn't work together. Those approaches wouldn't work together. And at the same time as you and more Elijah were in my opinion, playing up a little bit the potential success of Palestinian representation, I don't see how that works if at the same time you're trumpeting Hamas and what they're pursuing. Those strategies do not work together. That's my point.
I don't think we're playing it up. I think it's just kind of is what it is. I think you're playing it down. If we're going to say up or down. No, I think we're just saying it is what it is. When I'm looking back at civil rights and I see many of those people, John Lewis and these guys, they used to get beat and protest and everything else, and they wanted political representation. Why? They wanted somebody to look like them to be in the political process. In the 60s, it wasn't theater. When these guys are saying, I'm a progressive, what they're talking about is, I was black and I was fighting for civil rights. That's what they're talking about. What we're talking about today is, I get the theatrics back then, but what about now?
I'm genuinely confused. Has racism gotten better or has it not in the United States?
Racism has gotten better, which is kind of my point.
Okay.
That backs up my point, though. The fact that these guys have political representation is a benefit. It's a positive. That's, again, it is hard to get across if you've never been in a situation where you didn't have political representation. And sometimes we forget I guess, what that looks like on some level. So fair enough. This
Because
is kind of
I know some people who,
history.
I think I know some people, and probably some people in this network who are like, man, racism has not gotten any better. The official, nominal, superficial layers it might have, but if you look at the economic statistics, nothing is actually fundamentally changed.
Yes, from the standpoint of economics and everything else, yes, agreed.
So even that is contentious. My point is there's no clear track record for this kind of tokenism thing.
You
which
believe
is,
the 60s are like 2021. You believe the 60s and 50s for African Americans and the way society regarded African Americans is the same as 2021.
well, the use of my time machine puts them about a minute's distance from each other. So
I'm just asking, it's a yes or no.
Well, of course not.
Then how can you make the argument that there hasn't been positive changes from the standpoint of...
I didn't make that argument.
Sounded like you were making that argument.
I said that some people say that because I try to put different arguments on the table so that like a group of people trying to understand
So you don't
an
believe
elephant,
it?
we understand it.
So you don't believe it, you're just saying it. Because
No.
other people say it.
Wait, what?
I'm trying to understand.
I never literally said that
No,
I believe
what I'm
that. At
asking
every
you,
point in that argument just
let
now,
me be
I
very
said
clear.
other people have said this. I said at literally every turn, I was quite cautious and honest.
That's what I'm
here.
getting. I'm not attacking. I'm not hitting you. I'm trying to
get
clarify.
it, but you're saying something in the process that you're saying I said something that I didn't say, and I'm being very clear. I didn't say that. Go back and rewind, Jamarl.
I'm trying to clarify. From the standpoint of the 20s to the 60s, you would agree with me that it's a change. And that it's somewhat of a positive change, especially the way that African Americans
from the 60s
are
to the
regarded.
20s.
Yes, to 19 to 2021.
My personal opinion is totally racism's
Okay.
gotten better. 100%.
So when you said some people say it, you're not saying it from your own perspective. You're saying that some other people believe this stuff, but
I'm saying that there's an
don't
active
believe it.
debate. I'm saying that there's an active debate about this, and that we could bring on people in this room, probably within, I don't know, depending on who's in right now, within 100 feet, 80 feet, who we could get into a vociferous conversation about this with. And my point is not that I believe that, or not that other people believing that means anything, other than there's not a consensus on this. And so the idea that we should
It's not a
all look to
consensus
what
on
happened in
whether
the
the
civil
Earth is
rights
flat.
movement. What do you think?
There's not even a consensus on whether the Earth is
Okay,
flat.
but are you saying it's the same thing? Are you saying
On some level, I think, look, if you're looking at how blacks were regarded in the 60s, and you're telling me that there's no difference, or you're telling me that it hasn't gotten better, I'm going to say you are insane. And I'm not saying
I didn't
you
say
because
that.
you didn't say that.
I
But the
didn't say
people
that.
who you were referencing that you can bring in and have this vociferous fight, like I said, you can have a vociferous fight over whether it's a flat Earth.
Okay.
Between whether I would rather to live in the 60s or whether I live in 2021, and I think you would agree with me, would rather be in 2021.
But here's the point. That wasn't originally what I brought up. I didn't bring up the 60s, and we do
I
have
brought up the
calls.
60s.
We do have calls. What I brought up was Obama, and I would argue that Obama didn't make Black America safe again.
But that's why I brought up the 60s, because
I
Obama
get it,
came
but
out of
that's
the
not what I
context
brought
of
up.
the 60s.
We get more calls though. Or we have,
That's
we have
fine.
calls.
That's fine. But Obama doesn't apply.
That's what I brought up. Though. He was the person I used. Anyway, we've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
All right, free drill and science, free Derninger, and all hands off Haiti. Let them determine their future. NASA came out with a study some weeks ago dealing with the lunar cycle, dealing with it's called a lunar standstill every 18.6 years.
And this is going to screw with the flooding, right?
It screws with the flooding combined with other things dealing with the sun, and they have this guy named Professor Cor Otto Reis out of Germany, advisor to European Institute for Climate Energy, former president of the National Meteorological and Institute of Germany. Well, he's on the other side of the spectrum dealing with saying that climate change is not man-made. It's actually natural from natural cycles that have been going on for hundreds of millions of years. And the most study in that subject. So you have one side saying that it's man-made, a whole bunch of science saying it's man-made, and a whole bunch of other science saying that it's not man-made. So they got to have two debates. They got to put it on C-SPAN or make a documentary about it, but it's equal on both sides. So.
Well, I don't know. Wait, hang on a second. No,
It's not equal on both sides.
no, I don't know about that. Yeah, like that's a specific claim. So topic of conversation. I mean, science and politics in general. You can see this with COVID. Science tends to bias what it accepts and what it rejects based on political needs and based on the perceived sort of intensity of the situation. In other words, with COVID, you got scientists playing politician because they're having to navigate a crisis that only science can truly understand. Same thing with climate change, arguably. Only scientists, the assumption is, and I think it's probably a correct one, can truly understand the specific processes of how climate change would work, the model they would generate of how exactly increasing carbon, you get my point, increasing carbon dioxide concentration in the Earth's atmosphere increases the retention of light's rays and warms things up, and broadly that will have a deleterious effect on environments, ecologies, individual life forms, et cetera. That's the broad case, my point being. That clearly has political weight. So scientists are clearly going to be politically swayed by that, which means they're probably going to be pushing some people out and asserting some things and playing politician in the same way that they are during COVID. That doesn't mean that I automatically disbelieve COVID or that I automatically disbelieve the science on climate change. I don't think you do either. But Tarif, where'd you get the claim that they're both equal? Where'd you get the claim that each side has equal backing? If you're still there.
I'm trying to say, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry for saying both equal. What I'm saying is you have good scientists on both sides. One and that is
well, maybe, probably, but maybe, I don't know. I still buy that climate change exists and is happening. And so I guess I wanted to push back because if you say they're equal, then you can just say the jury's out 100%. Yeah. And if you say there are good scientists on both sides, I think there are good people on all sides, but that doesn't mean that I don't choose sides. I do. We got to close this hour out. Tarif, thank you for the call. We're taking your headlines. We're doing headlines again when we come back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back in a minute with the last hour of this morning show.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning of the world's most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across every side of most political aisles, from across the disunited states of America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. Hope everybody's having a great morning. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were about 14,637 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. There were also about 49 new deaths. That's a low death count and a low case count. However, those belie the fact that we've had an average of 51,939 cases per day over the past 2 weeks. That's an increase of 170% from the average 2 weeks earlier. Pardon me, over the past week, a week-long average. Anyway, that's a damn high case count is my point, and significantly up from when we were reporting it on Friday, up from about 45,000 to over 50. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point, and 56% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,405,000 people across the United States, and it has killed approximately 610,000 of us. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey said it's, quote, time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks, end quote, for the rising COVID cases in the state. Jamarl and I had a sort of fun back and forth on this one back at the 8 o'clock hour. I won't recap it. You guys can go back and check that out, but we disagreed slightly. GOP Representative Clay Higgins of Louisiana said yesterday that he and his wife have contracted COVID-19 for a second time. He referred to the virus as a, quote, now this is going to be fun. Pay attention, folks, quote, Chinese Communist Party biological attack weaponized virus, end quote. My point is, he just repeated himself a lot, and it's like, it makes me want to go sleep, slumber, rest in my bed, cot, alcove, or something like that. I don't know. My point is, I keep ragging him on him for it, but it's redundant. In national news, the Department of Justice has decided to drop a probe into Andrew Cuomo, investigating whether or not his administration violated the rights of nursing home residents. I want to talk about this with a few people soon, including Michael Goodwin and Ted Rall, with whom we've had conversations about Cuomo before. This is a big turnaround from the Biden administration, and it could be seen, and I will paint it, as a Democrat protecting another Democrat after he came under a lot of scrutiny and flack. Now, I don't think this will actually work. There's still an FBI probe into him, and Letitia James hopefully can bring home the bacon on all the stuff I'm sure he did wrong and the details of it. But anyway, the Department of Justice has dropped its probe into New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. In the last week, the United States has had 915 shootings, leaving 430 people dead amidst a massive violent crime spike in the last few months. In international news, there are ongoing clashes outside of parliament in Tunisia following the president's decision to suspend the legislature there today. This has been decried as a coup by the main parties in the country. The Speaker of Parliament began a sit-in at the building in Parliament, which troops have sealed off as outside rival political constituencies backing the president and the Speaker of Parliament threw stones at each other. New records from the United Nations show that Afghanistan civilians have been killed in record numbers in the first half of this year, with militants for the Taliban having captured approximately 50% of the country's territory, and the Taliban itself saying they've captured 85% of the territory. President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines gave his last State of the Nation address to the country he led for over 5 years today. Starting with a brutal anti-drug crackdown, the nation continues to deal with the coronavirus crisis, and the economy of the Philippines faces a long road to recovery. 136 students were kidnapped for ransom out of a Nigerian school in late May. The families and school administrators were able to raise the 30 million naira, that's $73,000, demanded, American dollars. Then this past weekend, the criminals abducted the man, delivering the money to them, keeping both the cash and the children. Parents are now resigned to fate and God, as raising more money is nearly impossible for them. In Earth and Science news, the FAA has classified Jeff Bezos as not an astronaut. While their definition includes reaching 50 miles above sea level, passengers must demonstrate activities during flight, quoting here, that were essential to public safety or contributed to human spaceflight safety, end quote. Due to the fully automated nature of the Blue Origin flight, nobody counted. No one on New Shepard will receive their wings and be listed an astronaut. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We've spoken about Nigeria before, but there's nothing to remind you about the depths of like cultural or social or the hell that faces people living there, where there's an incentive for a bunch of kids to regularly get kidnapped, abducted, so that they can get mass ransomed. And with a mass ransom, 73,000 American dollars for 130 kids. That's a chunk of change on the one hand, but another, that's like a single ransom for a random semi-wealthy Westerner getting kidnapped in Colombia or wherever. You get my point. That's actually not that much money. And then they can't afford it. They pay the money, and the kidnappers kidnap the messenger.
We'll take both.
And okay, we'll take your money and we'll keep the kids too. And whether we sell them back to you or we turn them into child warriors to kidnap more kids and keep this Ponzi scheme of violence and sadism going, it's a bad situation. That's hellish.
Yeah, that's why they say you don't negotiate with kidnappers. By the same token, these are their kids. And in some cases, I suppose you do. The problem becomes, okay, now that you've given them the money, what stops them from doing it again? Or what stops the incentive for them to do it again? You've basically created an incentive structure for them to do this. And I don't even know if it's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, it just seems like a cash-making enterprise.
Yeah, Ponzi scheme is a slight stretch, but it takes in more relevance when you consider the fact that many of the kids they kidnap, they will try to turn into child warriors.
Yes.
So you're bringing more people in to make you more money, and I get it's not quite a Ponzi scheme, but you get me.
I know what you mean. It's basically, it's business in a weird, off-putting way.
Yeah.
I mean, we keep seeing these kidnappings, and it happens over and over and over again. It seems like the government is incapable of protecting the group. I don't know where these people are from the standpoint of the country, whether they're more so in the countryside or whatever else. But yeah, we keep saying this. At a certain point, it looks like the government would say, okay, hey, we need to stop this. This looks bad, not to mention it is kind of our job to not allow that to take place. The secondary thing becomes, okay, well, jobs, modernity. Is that the answer to it? Where it's like, all right, well, instead of having a child soldier, this guy just has a job.
Well, but I mean, we were talking about Nigeria. Remember that Nigeria is the site of the End SARS protest, the Special Anti-Robbery Squad protests.
Right.
That when you're talking about, okay, the government stepping in to crack down on these groups, the government itself is intense.
The End
SARS and the Special Anti-Robbery Squad protest. We've had somebody on to talk about this. We only did 15 minutes on it. So it wasn't too big a topic. But yeah, the idea is there's this special government task force, this elite task force. This became a big protest movement around the world. At least we heard a lot about it from Nigeria. That's intensely corrupt and basically guilty of extorting and robbing people.
Okay.
So if that's the government, if that's their elite task force that they generate to end robbery.
Basically, there's no way out.
What would be that if that's their special anti-robbery squad? What would their special anti-kidnapping squad look like? What would the SACs be?
Oh man,
I'm pretty sure that would be followed up by the End SACs protest just a couple of years later.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Look, corruption is a problem, and a government that is utterly corrupt has a hard time functioning just in normal ways. I guess there would be a problem if the End Corruption Squad was radically corrupt. What would the End Kidnapping Squad be? I would just hope that there would be this different point of view because there are kids involved. That's all. Like, it's one thing to say, okay, we can find ways to make a huge amount of cash for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's another thing to say we're going to do this at the expense of 113 kids. That just seems Ugh, that's a tough one.
And there have been weird cases in the past where they have kidnapped kids and then apparently from the outside, like almost inexplicably returned them without getting ransoms, as far as I can tell. Now, maybe they did get a ransom and that part wasn't publicized, but there have been elements of this that have been pretty weird to look at that just don't make sense.
Yeah.
Which should make it interesting, which you might think would draw more media attention to it. And admittedly, you know, we've only covered a couple of times in the last couple of months, but it's just bizarre, man. And it's not a good.
So often.
Yes.
I mean, it's just very weird. We cover it every time it happens, but it happens so often.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we even brought somebody on to have a conversation about this.
And Austin, producer, just posting this in the chat right now. Been over 1,000 kidnappings in northern Nigeria since December.
Wow.
And he's also saying, I don't mean to start a spat, but he's saying, correction for Jamarl, you do negotiate with kidnappers, you don't negotiate with terrorists, and you don't just outright pay the ransom for kidnappings.
Ah, fair enough. There's a specific distinction. Yes, you're right. You're right. You don't negotiate with terrorists. Well, and you actually, people do negotiate with terrorists.
You do negotiate.
Yeah, at some point, they actually do. And even though you say you don't, but people actually do. And yeah, you don't supposed to pay the ransom. That's supposed to be the point. You can negotiate with kidnappers, but you can't pay the ransom.
Kidnapping's kind of in the middle of a hostage situation and a terrorist, something like that, and you definitely negotiate with the hostage holders. That's like the thing that you 100% out.
1,000% do.
And then there's a gradient as you get closer and closer to terrorism.
Yeah, it's like we need a helicopter on the building.
Yeah,
we don't want anybody to follow us. That type of stuff gets brought into play. Right here, in the last week, the United States has had 915 shootings and 430 people dead. It's a violent crime wave. Now, my thing to this was always, why is this okay? And that's the part that blows my mind. Like, I get if a cop kneels on a person's throat for 9 minutes. That shouldn't be okay, right? People should be like, whoa, that doesn't look right. That seems problematic. You know what I mean? People should be annoyed and very angry about that. The 1,000 killings a year, yes. People should be annoyed and bothered by the fact that cops kill 1,000 people a year. By the same token, I think people should be just as annoyed and bothered by communities where people are like ensconced in violence. Like we had all of those shootings that took place in Chicago. And you look at Chicago, you're like, Chicago is not the only place where killings and violence like this takes place. Why is this okay for a community in America to be living in basically a war zone? And why is that not as much of an outrage? Like that number is astonishing, 915 shootings. That's astonishing. And then you have 430 people, meaning half of the people who get shot basically die. Why? Shouldn't we engage that as a population? Shouldn't we look at, be like, hey, why is that there? And maybe there are ways to fix that so people aren't living in that. And by the way, I don't think for a moment people choose to live in war zones. I think people live in communities. I don't think anybody who's living in those communities are choosing to be in those communities. Otherwise, they would be somewhere else. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. But I think it's an outrage. I think it should be every bit as much as an outrage as somebody's throat being nailed on or somebody being, gunned down and shot. That's a big, big deal.
It is. And it's old and yet also kind of new.
Yes. That's the issue, that it's old. Like, it's not like, meaning the Chirac stuff had been known for years. Like, it's not like people are just coming to this, hey, Chirac, no, that's been known for years.
No, it's been going on for a long time. Yeah, the Chirac specifically, just think about that name for a second. It's bizarre.
They're talking about it like it's a war zone. People are getting killed to such a degree that you're comparing it to basically a literal war zone. And we accept it and we move forward with it.
And trap music is just not worth all the deaths. It's true. Trap music,
even with
the cultural export of Chicago in the past couple of years.
Trap music,
that's
is it? Oh, that's funny. I didn't know
that's not worth all of the sacrifice of lives. There's some good songs.
Yes, but no, it's not all the worth of the sacrifices of life. And look, it's not just Chicago, San Francisco, or California. California has decided to invest in these magnificent trash cans. Magnificent trash cans. Now, keep in mind, California is also the same state with homeless population living in basically shanty towns. The trash cans, I think, were like $73,000 a pop or something like that to design. And it's a massive not just waste and misappropriation of resources. And whether that's in Los Angeles, whether that's in Chicago, I'm making the point that some of this stuff should be paid attention to because these things are warts. And then it's like, we're like, oh, we hate the fact that there's killings and shootings. Okay, what is the environment that you're allowing people to inhabit? Well, that doesn't get touched. That doesn't get touched. They would act as if each individual shooting is coming from that person's own individual choice. Like, I am shooting that person. The government, the society has no stake at all in the fact that I am pulling the trigger on this. And I'm saying that's nonsense. That person grows up in a society within a particular context, all that stuff. If that person is doing it, there is something in the way that person was born and raised that is pushing that person to do it. Otherwise, we're talking about, spiritual stuff and all this, history, fate and all this other stuff. No, I think this stuff is environmental. Whether that's the shanty towns of California, whether that's the shootings and killings in Chicago, and it's not just Chicago. Chicago is not making up all of these killings. That's my thought.
I agree, ultimately.
Yeah.
We should, if you're down, let's close it.
Yeah.
We're going to be coming back with Colleen Rowley talking about the reality of the allegations of entrapment, in this case with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer and the plot to kidnap her, which some say, based on reporting from BuzzFeed recently, was entrapment, a textbook case of it. We'll be going back into whether that is actually the case. We're also going to be talking about January 6th, other cases of entrapment, where it gets applied, why it's a fairly hard charge to prove at this point in the American legal system, specifically. All those conversations and more with Colleen Rowley, lawyer, retired FBI agent, and former MPLS legal counsel on the other side of this break. We'll be right back.
Fault lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. An Iraq war vet tries to find some people that are similar-minded in the community of this country, just like him. He wanted to continue to practice guns. He wanted to continue to keep his physical fitness, which he considered to be a diminishing strength or diminishing resource. And so he goes out and he looks into various communities and he finds a group that he can work with. Only as he gets into the group and more involved, he realizes, oh my God, these guys are threatening this person or threatening that person. And they're saying these things like they want to start a civil war. So he, diligent American, goes and tells the feds. Now the feds, instead of saying, all right, thank you, we'll look into it, the feds use him as a resource. He's wearing a wire. He's connecting with other members and pulling those members together in this kind of grand conspiracy. And in doing so, gets all sorts of information, all sorts of data, background, and everything else. The catch becomes, with those guys that he was able to get and bring together, would they have done it without him? And that gets to this whole question of entrapment. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Colleen Rowley. Colleen Rowley is a MPLS legal counsel who wrote the memo about the FBI's pre-9/11 failures and testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was also a Democratic Farmer Labor Party candidate for Congress in Minnesota. Colleen, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I would imagine you've seen this case at this point. I've read through this article. It is a fascinating article. The first part gives you this kind of perspective of the government. Like, this is how they went about the case. This is the way they're calling it. This is the way they've dictated this case to be. We did an investigation. We found these violent guys. These guys were planning to basically raid the governor's mansion. And we put all of these guys together, etc. But when you look into the details, it does get a little fudgier or dodgier in regards to some of the things that was taking place. What do you think about this case as a whole, just as you've looked through it and as you've kind of, gone through it? What is your perspective of what is taking place? And more importantly, do you consider this to be a textbook case of entrapment? For that matter, what is entrapment? Let's start there. Let's start at the very basics. What is entrapment, and does this case represent entrapment?
Well, as a Minneapolis legal counsel for 13 years, I actually taught agents about entrapment because the Constitution allows, informants, FBI informants, to obviously listen up if they're involved in things, and if they witness or experience some criminal activity, they can later testify, and at the very least, they're encouraged to go to law enforcement. So some aspects of this case, certainly as it started, if people are suspicious, you know what the government says is if you see something, say something. Of course, they can't do anything without public cooperation. You can't even catch a bank robber unless somebody in the public recognizes the picture from the bank camera. The FBI doesn't have any great, as we see on TV, you know, with X-Files and all these things, like they're omniscient. They need public cooperation. So that's all fine and good. The problem comes after, especially when you're in these situations after 9/11, where the public is very afraid, and the FBI then promises that they can prevent all future acts, you know, criminal acts. You know, this goes into that movie where, you know, they say the law enforcement, you know, if they surveil everyone and vacuum up everyone's data, that they then will be able to somehow prevent future criminal acts. Well, we would all like, I guess many people would like that to be the case, and especially when you're afraid of terroristic acts. The problem is it's just not possible. So when you're operating in this kind of environment where the FBI director, for instance, goes out and makes claims that from now on we will prevent all future acts of terrorism, as FBI Robert Mueller did for years and years after 9/11, what you get then are hundreds of these cases of entrapment. And the public, you know, doesn't really look behind it. And when the FBI says, look, this guy was going to push the button and blow up that building, you know, it was a fake bomb we gave him, but he was ready to do that. They don't look into the context and see what it took to get that person to that stage. You know, FBI undercover agents and informants that either coerced or bribed, in some cases, you know, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to some poor guy off the streets who couldn't even afford to buy his own alcohol, and they promised him cars. You know, when you overcome what a person would normally or was predisposed to do through such bribes and or coercion or even threats, then it's entrapment. And so, you know, obviously you're not supposed to do that. The reason you're not supposed to do that is because, first of all, it serves no purpose if you're getting people who would not commit a crime. If they're not predisposed to commit a crime of violence and you're getting them to that stage, what in the heck have you achieved?
I want to pause on that for just a second, Colleen, and thank you so much for joining us. We're joined by Colleen Rowley, a former FBI agent, whistleblower, and a political figure in your own right in Minnesota as well. We can come back on that potentially. But can we get into the definition here? Because you were just giving a kind of definition here, but that sounds almost like a sting operation to me, which would be considered legal, I believe. What is entrapment? What would a stinger operation be considered? Just basically, I'm trying to get a sense. What's the lay of the land in terms of the terms and their definitions?
Yeah, it's a line. It's just a line. A sting operation, if you did not overbear the will of the person that you're going to charge and get them to do something that they were not otherwise predisposed to do. So if you just suggest an idea, there's two different ways this can happen, but if you just suggest an idea to someone and they just really, right off the bat, they say, that's great, let's make Molotov cocktails or whatever, then that would not be entrapment because you just suggested it. Now, if you have to call the person over and over and over, and then they still are not predisposed to do it, and then you say, okay, well, I'll give you $100,000 if you'll do it, or you threaten them to do it, then you're overbearing the will of that person. So it is just a line. And again, when juries and judges are scared of terrorism, and an FBI agent testifies, that we didn't do anything wrong, sometimes, by the way, prosecutors even withhold some of this evidence of all of these calls and things that went on. It's not, of course, to their advantage in a court case to reveal all of that. then it's entrapment. But unfortunately, it's usually not ever recognized by judges and courts. Let me just go back. This BuzzFeed article, by the way, is excellent because it is talking about this whole context of what leads these people. Usually in the press, all we see is that final part. You know, oh, look, they were going to light a fire at that church, or they were going to do this. That's all you see. You don't realize all of that all of the stuff that went into that. So by the fact that they were able to get, I think it's like really thousands and thousands of these emails and communications, and so those can all be analyzed to see if the will of the actual people they're charging was overborne. The fact that there are 12 different government informants in this case is there's a lot of things that are suspicious, but just the fact that there are 12, and it looks like that's almost the same number that are being charged. So for every defendant in the case, there were government people that were acting in here, and because they're normally not told who are the other government informants, right, they can actually egg each other on.
So you get this kind of runaway feedback effect thing that you can imagine. Is that going to sway the any potential court decision on this? Is that going to affect how this all plays out, Colleen?
Well, like I said, I think it's very rare that you can actually have a successful entrapment defense, but we'll have to see. Lots of things are changing now, and let me also just mention the context, the larger context of the FBI's problems with operating. Really, and this all goes all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover, by the way. This isn't anything new. This isn't just something that cropped up even after 9/11. If you go back to J. Edgar Hoover, especially during the 50s with the Red Scare and the communism, and then that kind of morphed into the anti-Vietnam era where the FBI had COINTELPRO. What they were doing was operating, they were infiltrating into all of these, regular constitutional groups, feminists, Black Power, anti-war, all different groups, and then they were, in some cases, inciting violence in those groups.
They were doing that because they considered those groups anti-government. And on some level, that's the through line, anti-government.
Right.
If anything, these groups that they were going after, the Watchmen groups, I don't have an issue with them first starting this. Because when I first read this, I thought, oh, God, these guys are scary. These guys are terrifying. And so, the guy with the gun screaming that he wants to do X or Y to the governor, or these guys who saying they want to incite a rebellion, fair enough. Watch that guy. Pay attention to that guy. However, there's a difference between a guy being anti-government by himself versus being anti-government in the sense of knocking something over. And I think the thing I would disagree with you on is it does serve a purpose. If you're the FBI, for example, if you're TSA and you want to deter people from bringing something into the country, well, it's beneficial to have a TSA. It gives this kind of theatrics of we're doing X and Y, we're trying to get these things, when the fail rate might be a lot higher. But the fail rate doesn't matter as much, then it's a deterrence in and of itself. Meaning, from the standpoint of the FBI, they want to give this impression that they are doing God's work.
That they're watching.
That they're watching. We got this. We're stopping these things from taking place. Whether they are or not, or whether they are doing it in earnest or not, I think it matters on some level less. Yes, you would hope that they would get somebody. But if they can give the impression to the public that we got one, we're not going to get all of them, but we got this one and we're going to get more, then that's, there's a political value to that beyond the reality.
There's deterrent value. I would agree. And even after 9/11, the Islamophobia, there's a book written by Trevor Aronson that there were literally hundreds of these cases infiltrating into different Muslim groups, and then again, really in some cases, definitely in some cases, overbearing the will of those people. And the FBI, though, is interested in prosecution. They're not just interested in the deterrence. When you recognize that there is so much surveillance and so much of this infiltration, then yes, it does chill. The problem is it also chills regular constitutional activity, dissent. It does chill even dissent. And again, this goes all the way back even to the Hoover era. Then it blends into, by the way, during the time I was in the FBI, it blended into organized crime, where the FBI was operating the very top. They call them top echelon. This comes out of the church committee. After the abuses, the church committee put restraints because they said you can't operate the head of these groups and then say, well, all the people who went along with it, now we charge them when you're operating the bosses and whatever. So the FBI, after during the time when 80s, usually the 80s for a couple of decades, was operating some of the bosses of the mafia, including Whitey Bulger, who was murdering other people, and the FBI let him murder other people, and they looked the other way, and they covered up for this.
I did not know that. Are you serious? Like, I didn't realize. So the CIA was operating some of the heads of the bosses, and then the bosses would tell people to do stuff, and then the CIA would get the people who did the stuff.
They were control. Yes, this is the collusion with organized crime.
Yeah, I knew about the collusion. I didn't realize it was that, intense.
These all blend seamlessly into each other, and you do have those restraints. There's this moment where these abuses are recognized, and the church committee puts on significant attorney general restraints. Number one, you're not supposed to operate the head of any group. Because you know why? In this case, one of the FBI informants became second in command of the group in Michigan. Okay, so that actually would have violated probably the attorney general guidelines that came after the church committee. So you have those moments, but then you also have those moments where the public opinion shifts because, like 9/11 is a key moment, and people then say, oh, well, you have to prevent all future acts of crime and terrorism. And when that happens, it's like a green light. And then you see more abuses occur. Many of the cases after 9/11, like I said, Trevor Aronson has a whole book documenting. Not all of them probably, definitely not all of them were, but the FBI was operating informants. One guy was paid like a few $1 million. They were allowing some of these informants to have sex affairs with the targets. I mean, there's all kinds of things that would normally overbear the will of most people. Here locally, by the way, in Minnesota, we had a woman who infiltrated these lesbian anti-war committee, and these were all women. And for a year, she was an undercover officer and trying to incite them. Oh, we're going to have this glorious socialist revolution or whatever, trying to incite them to say things like this and taping them and everything. We also had a case during the Republican National Convention where there was a 31-year-old informant, FBI informant, who got these 20-year-olds, two 20-year-olds, to make Molotov cocktails, and they went to prison for 5 years. But he had to he's like the father figure for them. He's telling them what to do. Now, would they have normally have done that on their own without this coercion and whatever? And he was paid lots and lots of money. So this is where these things can become abusive. And as I said, it's a line. In this case, with all of these conversations now being aired publicly in newspaper accounts and whatever, the prosecutor, I think, by the way, the prosecutor is in trouble for a prior case where he did not give all of the what they call exculpatory, information. So in this case, at least I think that will be curtailed, and the jury will get to decide, would these guys, were they just boasting? Of course, men get together, drinking and whatever, and there's a lot of talk.
I don't know what you're talking about, Colleen. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm sorry. That's foreign to me. Colleen Rowley, we're going to go to a break, and we're going to come back with you. I'm joking, of course. When we come back, I want to get into this conversation about what the FBI wants here. 3 motivations, 2 bad faith, 1 good. You led with the good faith interpretation here. I'll put them all out there, and when we come back, you can tell us which you think it is. Are they like a firefighter with matches caught in their pockets? Are they starting it because they want to, get the recognition for shutting it down? That's one bad faith interpretation. Are they trying to control the opposition? Are they trying to create an enemy that they can control? That's another bad faith. Or, like you said, is this all just pre-crime prevention, where they're trying to take it to the next step? And if this doesn't work, I'm curious, Colleen, what do you think will? We're going to be getting to those questions and more when we come back with Colleen Rowley. She is a lawyer, retired FBI agent and former MPS legal counsel who wrote a memo about FBI's pre-9/11 failures and testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee, also a Democratic Farmer Labor Party candidate for Congress in Minnesota. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back with Colleen on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined by Colleen Rowley, lawyer, retired FBI agent, whistleblower, and former MPLS legal counsel who wrote a memo about FBI's pre-9/11 failures and testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was also a Democratic Farmer Labor Party candidate for Congress in the state of Minnesota. Colleen, I close this out with a question. I'll bring us back, just restate it, and then pass it over to you. One way of painting what the FBI has done here, whether it's entrapment or not, but it certainly seems to be sort of testing those boundaries, is that they're a firefighter with matches stuck in their pocket, that they basically created this, they lit this whole thing on fire. They created this movement so that they could come in and stop it and get the credit and get their paychecks and justify their existence in some sense. That's a pretty dismal interpretation of what happened here, and I don't think that's my first explanation, although, maybe there's a part of it there. There's also the element of potentially controlled opposition, that these are right-wing extremist groups that, as they did with the mafia, that kind of collusion and control, that collaboration even, that gives you a level of influence that can prevent crime, but also, of course, risks creating it. And then third, the best faith interpretation is that, like you said, they're simply trying to prevent crime before it happens, which is either the subject of a dystopian sci-fi film like The Minority Report, or just the next step in law enforcement. You're trying to predict and prevent. Which of those do you think it is? Where do you think the balance falls? And if it's the last one primarily, how can they do that better? What mistakes are they making here? Colleen.
Great question, by the way. Great question. I do think that the context of this particular case and the systemic pressures on agents is a key to answering it. Because you can't attribute, obviously, monolithic intent to an entire agency of 12,000 different agents and 20-some thousand different employees. Everybody has different motives. There are some agents who are very ambitious and careerists, and and in the past, there's no doubt, obviously, a couple of them have gone to prison for operating like the agent who operated Whitey Bulger went to prison for that. My supervisor in New York was prosecuted for murder for operating a top echelon mafia guy. He got off, but narrowly got off, but he was prosecuted for it.
Wow.
There are some who will, because they do get incentive awards, and this is how you make your career, is by making these big cases. Okay, so there are some. There are also a lot of good people who are trying to do their job and trying to prevent crime. That's kind of a mission impossible. And when your boss sets you up by promising the public that will prevent, after 9/11 especially, I'm referring to when Robert Mueller promises will prevent all future acts of terrorism, that's really putting the FBI in a terrible position. It can't be done.
You're saying the incentive structure itself creates this environment where the agents are, all right, we have to get the case, we have to get so-and-so, we have to prove our existence.
And they were tasked with this. And and Mueller, from what she's saying, tasked the FBI, the agency, with, we need to do this, and it's functionally impossible. You can't predict and prevent everything.
And
yeah, and people would love to believe that, see? And it does put, you are scared because, what if this guy was the next one? Because look at the opposite. I'm going to play devil's advocate from the other side. When something does happen, a terrorist act, they'll say, oh, look, why wouldn't the FBI have known this? Look what he said on Facebook. That's not reality. I think one way to do things better is to have your leaders actually explain this to the public. We all duped by television shows and Hollywood. You mentioned Minority Report, but we're all duped by this stuff. And so, but for a leader then to explain the reality of police work and detective work and say, explain it so it's not really possible to prevent all future acts of terrorism or crime for that matter. And so we can do what we can do, and yet sometimes we get lucky, and sometimes somebody does come into the FBI. Look at Bernie Madoff. He was operating his Ponzi scheme for 20 years before someone came in and told the FBI about it. So this is what you have to explain to the public and bring them back to reality. It's one of the ways. These restraints have to be followed in all cases, not just flavor of the day. So, for instance, when I describe this whole morphing over decades and decades of who the FBI targets, back in the 50s, it was the communist groups, then it was the anti-war groups, then it was the mob in the 80s and whatever. And now, and after 9/11, it was the Muslim groups. And now it looks like the whole thing is shifted over to so-called white supremacy groups. Now, all of these groups can have actors that are violent and will commit crimes. Okay, so you have to follow those lines carefully. And again, this was our lectures that we got all through the time I was, teaching constitutional laws, that we had to follow those carefully, because you do have agents who are very ambitious, will operate and go past the lines because they can make their cases this way and get incentive awards. And then you do have other good ones who are trying their darndest just to prevent something terrible from happening. And it's not monolithic, this intent. And when you have systemic, I should say the one other thing that can occur here is that leadership needs to reduce those systemic pressures on agents and incentives. So, for instance, maybe a case where you really judge that they did prevent an act of terrorism, yes, maybe they do get an incentive award in those cases. But you don't give incentive awards for setting up people like, again, these hundreds of things after 9/11 and or all of the awards and promotions that occurred during COINTELPRO. I mean, look at the abuses and now learn the lesson from those. Not Mark Felt, what's his name? William. His last name was Williams. In the COINTELPRO era, the guy who rose up to be second under J. Edgar Hoover was the head of COINTELPRO. Okay, so the incentives, again, for commuting these abuses was incredible in that period. You should learn the lesson from the church committee, and that shouldn't occur. There should not be these kinds of perverse incentives. It should be the system itself should be set up so that you have good people doing their job, trying when somebody does come in from the public, it's all vetted and investigated carefully. And then obviously if there are signs that need to be looked at, you continue to do that. But you don't then let your informants become the overpowering force in that situation that then gets people to do things that they otherwise would not do. I do know of cases after, since I've retired that really, really went past. And these are people that never would have committed a crime. The FBI as a whole was getting its budget made from these cases. They could go out and say these things. So as a whole, that's not to say there aren't good people, whatever. And I do know of these two cases here locally where it was incredibly bad. And by the way, those agents rose up. They got promotions and everything else, even though they didn't accomplish anything from the sense of reducing terrorism. They actually were adding to it, of course, and adding to the fear factor, making people. As you say, there could be some deterrence. But usually that deterrence doesn't work too well at the time. It maybe in hindsight. I'm just going to tell a little story because back in the day of probably early 60s when there was civil rights. We had a civil rights activist. He's long dead now, but he was a Jewish civil rights activist who went down on the buses in the South. He then became an anti-war activist, and he later got his Freedom of Information file from the FBI decades later. And he found out that some of the meetings that he went to, he thought he was overjoyed that, 5 or 6 people were showing up to a meeting, at the time. And he found out later that 3 of them were informants.
Oh, that's disappointing. That's even years later. That's almost comical, but also sad and deeply worrying and serious. Colleen,
That's
Oh, pardon me. You learned a lot of this stuff, and this is, to be honest, why we're talking to you, the whistleblowing you did. You came to, public attention, and Chuck Grassley, interestingly enough, seemed to take your word and try to reform the FBI. He seemed to do this push. I'm basing this on what has been written about the time. Can you please briefly, in a couple minutes we have with you, explain what you were testifying about, what mistakes the FBI had made before 9/11, what mistakes you saw them making, and what has substantially changed after you testified and after changes were made? Colleen.
Oh boy, I don't know if I can do this very quickly, but the problem before 9/11 was that they were very lackadaisical, and you actually were punished. It was kind of on the other end of it. So the agents in FBI headquarters refused to give permission for this investigation to go on, even though the agents locally here were quite aware that this was a terrorist. He had all the signs, and there was all kinds of 20-some pages of probable cause.
You're talking about, I believe the name is Zacharias Moussaoui?
That's right. So this terrorist was connected to the other 19 terrorists, and if they had investigated through flight schools, there was another memo saying investigate flight schools. If they had done their jobs in FBI headquarters, by the way, if they had even read the memos, these are all documents before 9/11. There's one document that says Osama bin Laden is entwined with the Chechen terrorist leader. And the Chechen terrorist leader is who Zacharias, the French, told us Zacharias Moussaoui was working for. This is all before 9/11. Our headquarters says there's no probable cause. They said, well, the Chechens, by the way, because strategically, the Chechens were kind of like our proxy forces. Some of these people, I don't know if bin Laden was an actual FBI informant, but the Chechen was likely, that Chechen terrorist leader, because it's against the Soviet Union, whatever, so he might have been our ally, our proxy. These are very difficult things. So in the way... because you have strategic goals in the world that conflict then with, actually investigating in a cool, objective way who is, possibly doing something.
Is that what you see having happened? Was it the geopolitics that this might have been he might have been working for he said he was working for the Chechens. We broadly were backing them because it was a way to take down the Soviets. Therefore, we had our hands in the pot, and we didn't, on a low level, this wasn't getting passed around. Is that your contention?
Well, the families, the 9/11 families are suing Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia, 15 of the 19 hijackers came from there. And, why was that all covered up for all these years? It was covered up by the government because of geostrategic indications. There's always this problem. When Whitey Bulger was covered up, FBI's operating the top echelon boss of the Irish mob in Boston, and Robert Mueller even helped cover it up. They put innocent people in jail, etc. So why does that happen? It happens because of these strategic indications that they claim when it's your informant, it all has to be kept secret, etc. And so there's all kinds of things at work here. And pulling the cover away, going back to whistleblowing, pulling the cover away from these things so that the truth can actually come out. And certainly there's always going to be some malfeasance on the part. We're human, so there's always going to be, at the very least, mistakes made.
But Colleen, it sounds like every incentive structure in the world in this process is for them to do exactly what they're doing. It just does. I mean, if you think about it, the people who are aggressive and want to get ahead, well, those people are going to be aggressive as long as they don't go too far. There's a certain amount of leeway and nuance that they get that may be practically illegal, but not necessarily objectively so, meaning in a way that anybody could prosecute or anything else. And these cases, I mean, like you said, people don't tend to look between or under the covers of these cases. So what would be the hedge, or what would be the disincentive for anybody in the agency to basically be aggressive in pushing these cases? I just don't see the back push.
Yeah, well, there isn't much of a back push other than, sometimes individuals have their own, they have ethical standards. And again, there are good people that would not do this. I tell you, I was warned when I first joined the FBI. There was an older agent, probably just close to retire. No, he had retired. It was a retired agent. And he pulled me aside and said, I got involved in this COINTELPRO and somebody died. I don't know if he was referring to Fred Hampton or not, but he was referring to somebody. And he goes, and we ended up being prosecuted. My supervisor was in trouble. And he goes, don't ever go that far. It kind of stuck with me. I was like my first year. So these things have happened in the past. And there are people that, again, that say, hey, this goes too far. Our agent in the Twin Cities, in the Zacharias Moussaoui case, was doing agents, by the way, it wasn't just one, were doing an excellent job of investigating factually. Stick to the facts. You don't have to do this, go the next level and overpowering. And if you find out, by the way, if you find out that your informant is the one committing the crimes, then you have to sometimes even be a whistleblower on those cases, because the systemic forces and the secrecy is the only reason that Whitey Bulger and this other case in New York of operating top echelon, the only reason those became public were because of intrepid people with ethics, morals, and who were almost whistleblowers themselves, judges and there was an assistant prosecutor in the Whitey Bulger case who pried into it, and also somebody in the press. So, that's the answer here. You can't have this excessive secrecy to cover up when Saudi Arabians, Al-Qaeda, by the way, Al-Qaeda people affiliated with Saudi Arabia are attacking. You can't tell the country that it's Afghans or Iraqis. No, you can't do that. And so people should have been whistleblowers when the Bush administration claimed it was Iraq that had attacked us on 9/11. There should have been. Robert Mueller should have been. By the way, Robert Mueller went right along with it. He gave speeches saying, "Oh, Saddam's aligned with 9/11. Then they're gonna have weapons of mass destruction." He went right along with it. So that's what you need. You need to incentivize truth-telling and pull away this veil of secrecy, because when you do pull away the veil of secrecy, people will be more incentivized to do the right thing.
I agree 100%. I'm sad it's ethics that we have to rely on instead of some sort of institutional structure that keeps these things in play. But morality springs eternal, and I think if the FBI were composed of people as pure-minded as you clearly are, Colleen Rowley, I think we'd be in a much better place. I think the world would be a lot better, and the FBI would be a lot more of a functional institution. But we've got to close it here. We only have so much time to talk about this. Colleen Rowley, great conversation. Really fun talking with you for the first time. Hope we can get you back. Thank you for talking with us this morning.
Okay, sure.
Absolutely. That was Colleen Rowley, lawyer, retired FBI agent, and former MPLS legal counsel. She wrote a memo about FBI's pre-9/11 failures and testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was also a Democratic Farmer Labor Party candidate for Congress in Minnesota. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute taking your calls in our last 6 minutes of this show. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we're back and we're taking your calls. We got about 5-6 minutes of time. Let's try to fill it. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, 202-521-1320. Brave, calling in from Atlanta. Your first stop. You're on the line. What's on your mind, Brave?
Hey, when I was calling in last week, I was kind of alluding to some sci-fi stuff that I like concerning poverty. I guess my ultimate point was that we don't, in our society here in the real world, we don't invest in poverty. We don't invest in changing those things. And it goes, I guess this can be a part of the conversation you guys were having earlier. We don't invest in poverty. We want to invest in fixing those problems. And there's no mystery to how to resolve those problems because you have perfect examples usually on the other side of town or across the street or across the block where things are just fine and doing fine. I think that solves the problem. I do want to touch real quickly the COVID thing. I'm sorry. Look, it's real problematic that they're drawing this line. Like even with the, I heard that clip has been played numerous times now with the Alabama official saying the regular people,
it's their fault,
vaccinated. Yeah, that's a dangerous line across, especially when all the information is not being shared. The gesture you guys just had talked specifically about derailing the FBI's entrapment programs, basically entrapment programs are running, right? And saying that a good way of dealing with this is to remove the veil, right, and make things readily available, information readily available for the public. That applies all the way across the board. And I think it's it would be very helpful, right, and you would see a greater success rate concerning the pandemic, the vaccine rate, the unvaccinated, and the reason why they don't want to get vaccinated. If they truly shared information, they were truly like even delving into these things. Because consider that if you're only pushing slot A, I'm not even going to get into the politics. I'm just going to say if you're only pushing slot A, you have an entire other alphabet with the tools, right, that you're not investing any time in, not sharing any information in, then you are doing a disservice to the public because you got a large group of people, myself included, who are not messing with that vaccination. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, and I don't watch Fox News all the time. It doesn't affect my opinion of it at all, right? It's just the fact that I try to get as much information as I can from as many sources as I can, and the things that I have been seeing tell me that's not the best way for me to go. And you got many people that feel that way. So making those people out to be this or that when it's not even the case is dangerous. And if it is the fact you're going to have a great swath of society that's not willing to take on that vaccination or whatever the case is, then maybe you should invest some time in also sharing other methods that are being used and tried in other places, right? Even if it's just a matter of personal care, personal health, and things of that nature, maybe you should also invest time in spreading that information as well.
Brave, real quick, what is being used in other places where you're getting a 99%, basically 99% of the people that are coming in are people who are unvaccinated? What other methodologies are being used that is getting some efficacy anywhere near that?
Well, two things. First thing, I have to challenge the premise, right? Because one, the way they're introducing this number, right? You're going off. They're saying that there's a 99% or 120% increase, right? Increase from down numbers. So if there were no numbers before, let's just say, for example, there was nobody going to the hospitals before, which is
no. It's not an increase or comparison. It's just 99% of the people that are being hospitalized and dying have not been vaccinated. That's not a comparison to anything. It's just when we're looking at the numbers, hard numbers, this is what they are.
Right, but there are hard numbers that show something completely different than that, right? There are hard numbers that show other circumstances. Like, for instance, we're totally ignoring what's coming out of Israel. As a matter of fact, this week, now we don't live in Israel.
No, keep going. I want to hear what he's saying because I think I can push back on this. I think I know what you're talking about, but I might not. And you might have something that I don't understand. Brave.
Consider there's a report coming out of Israel talking about the cases they have, right? And I have the spreadsheet in front of me, right? They have it broken down by age groups. So let's just say, just taking the top line, and I'll be happy. And actually, I did share this information to you guys by Twitter, right? Age group 20 to 29, cases vaccinated, 95 cases unvaccinated, 25, right? These are the people that are going to the hospital, and it is a whole spreadsheet. Percent of cases vaccinated, 79%. Percent of population vaccinated, 78%. Now, these numbers and these percentages represent the people that are in the hospital, confirmed cases in their hospitals, right, that are being treated for COVID. There are numbers that are showing that people who have been vaccinated are catching COVID again. And I'm not saying that if you're vaccinated, you're catching COVID. If you're not vaccinated, you're not catching COVID. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is we're being told that only, like even you had the president come out on some bullcrap, you might have been a senior.
Yeah, he lied.
That if you, yeah, exactly. They're lying. They're misleading. If you're not giving all the information, then you are misleading the public.
In the case of Israeli numbers, it gets complicated because I've seen people use different statistics from different times. And so the one that I just heard from you isn't one that I've heard before. I have some people saying that. Broadly, the thing is if most people are vaccinated, then most of the, as far as I can tell, then by and large, a lot of those people who are vaccinated, you will get COVID breaking through. You know, they could get sick. You could certainly be able to test for it in a lot of cases. They might get hospitalized, and there's a chance that they die. It's just those things are all significantly diminished. But if the majority of the Israeli population is vaccinated, you also need to look at who's vaccinated. It would be predominantly older people. Now, I know you brought up younger people at first, but if this is something from the UK, if 98% of old people are vaccinated, they're the ones who would get most sick from it. You'd still have breakthrough cases among that population. In other words, you might see more than you'd expect, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't work. I understand this stuff is complicated, and I 100% agree with you that we therefore need to do a better job of talking about it and explaining it, and the government really should be doing a better job. And the stuff does just get shut down. So agreed on those counts. When it comes to some of the specifics, you might disagree, but hey, so we talk facts. Anyway, you've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We need to close today's show out. We'll be back at 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, folks. Thank you to all of our listeners, callers, guests, producers, engineer, and my co-host. Thank you for listening. See you again tomorrow, folks. Fault Lines.